Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 72 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. It's Friday and it is that time of week. If you are in the midst of your first Bitcoin crash, welcome, because we're going to be discussing everything from somebody that has been there right from the beginning. I've been through the $30 crash to $3. I've been through the $20,000 crash to $3,000. I've been through the $70,000 crash to $17,000, $3,000. And now we are going through one of the least worrying crashes. And I'll be sharing with you exactly what it means if this is the first time for you. So welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk. This is episode 72. My name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 2 decades on the subject of investing, Bitcoin and money. Obviously, Bitcoin only came 16 years later, as people like to point out in the comments when they're being a little bit snarky. We're going to be discussing talk about hard money. Every week we discuss this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. And without further ado, we got a lot that we're going to be discussing. So today, the main topic and the main theme throughout is the 2025 Bitcoin crash. And also, of course, we have to tie in the Epstein Files as the proof of weapons network is being dismantled one piece at a time while we resist against it with peaceful proof of work. So we're going to be discussing how the proof of weapons network and the Epstein Files fit together when we go through the macro section and everything that happened this week in macro. As well as what it means, essentially, this crash was the biggest 4-day crash since the FTX collapse, which was an unnatural implant in order for the Federal Reserve to execute a pump and dump network and attempt to infiltrate our sector and hand over as much Bitcoin from you over to BlackRock and the other players of the other financial mafia of the proof of weapons network. Okay, so when we cover the macro side, we're going to be going through a very important part, one half of the proof of weapons network, which is the euro dollar, the USD to EUR relationship, which is currently being recollaborated as we speak. And finally, when we go through the geopolitical section, I want to connect the dots into something that shamefully is getting no attention. And it absolutely is 100% relevant to getting ahead and preparing for a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs. And that is the violence that is happening as a result of the proof of weapons network in the Dominican Republic of Congo. I would like to connect the dots for you because your traditional media will not connect them between the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Israel-Palestine conflict and how it all ties together into understanding how to prepare for a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs. So buckle up. We're going to be going through each section in depth, and afterwards we also upload each of the videos, break it down into 3 for those that want to stay relevant in one section. But if you are like me and you want to know how everything fits together, then I'm going to give you everything you need to know about what happened this week and how to prepare for what comes next. So let's go straight into section 1, this week in Bitcoin. So as I said in the intro, we've had the largest 4-day crash, let's call it, in Bitcoin since FTX. Now, what does it actually mean? So if you are going through this for the first time, if you're a long-term subscriber, you'll know because we shared so many since I first uploaded those monetary reform videos around the time that Bitcoin launched, and all of the crashes and everything we've been through together as Bitcoin went from 0 to over $100,000 as it is today. But we just got a 25% correction. Now, after a hack, and this was what we had, I covered it last week, the Bybit hack. The Bybit hack is the largest hack that has ever happened in our sector, in our industry. Now, it was mainly around a multi-signature smart contract for Ethereum from the cold wallet. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into what that actually means so you can understand that it's really got nothing to do with Bitcoin and the irrationality of the market because of all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the weakness of people not understanding exactly what we teach in This Week in Bitcoin, Macro, and Geopolitics. You can't see the bigger picture here. So they are selling to the manipulators that want to buy them from them as well. So this was the largest exchange hack that we've ever seen. Now, at the time, the peak of the market, the peak price we've had is $109,000 per Bitcoin. And I'm not looking at the live price, but we're currently trading at approximately $80,000. And those people that like to trade and like to look at the technical analysis and draw lines on charts think that there might be about 75K Bitcoin. And who knows? Who cares? The point is that that's only a 25% correction from the top to where we are right now. Now, previous exchange hacks have led to approximately a minimum of 30%, downward to 60%. Some of them in the extremes, like Mt. Gox, led to approximately a 75% in 80% correction. I remember when Bitcoin was over $1,000, manipulated by WillyBot, which was a bot created by Mark Capellas and the team at Mt. Gox, after they bought a exchange that was missing 80,000 Bitcoin from the founder of XRP and Ripple. What's his name? Jeb McCaleb. And there was 80,000 Bitcoin missing. And so he built a bot in order to try and manipulate his way out of it and find those Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin went to over $1,000. And after the exchange hack, I think we came down to about $200, if memory serves me well. So that is what's normal after an exchange hack in those early days. We are so liquid right now that the only thing that led to the 25% crash and whatever comes next was the fact that everybody was over leveraged and was trading futures and options, which are financial weapons of mass destruction that are constructed from the fiat currency money printing world. Those of you that live in the fiat currency money printing world, you'll know that you have to leverage debt in order to beat inflation. And it is designed for you to go deeper and deeper into debt. And even if you're rich, leverage your assets so that you can support the profits of the banks and financial institutions, which are the net beneficiaries of the creators of digital currency like dollars and euros and pounds, that use the central banking economic hitmen in order to try and prop up the system and manipulate you. The Federal Reserve has had 20 pump and dumps ever since it was created, and it required World War I to create it. But anyway, it is the levers of the fiat currency derivatives world which is causing these market corrections. And if you are engaging in those gateway drugs instead of owning Bitcoin, then you will probably either learn your lesson after you end up with no Bitcoin because you saw it as a weapon in order to leverage debt and try and end up with more Bitcoin, or you figured out that actually Bitcoin was a gift that the world gave us. It was a peaceful resistance against the central banking system. It gave us a way of opting out by owning our own Bitcoin. And by owning our own Bitcoin without the financial terrorists like BlackRock in the middle, where they issue a paper version, IOU, a Bitcoin, and then use that in order to try and persuade you to pay a derivative so that they can charge interest, so that that interest can prop up a debt-based Ponzi scheme called the dollar, so that you can have a perpetual cycle of dollar-denominated debt, which increases exponentially forever, where individuals go deeper into debt until they can no longer afford to live, and they supplement their income on credit cards and payday loans as the rich use these derivatives in order to steal more money for you. And they use their other there are other institutions like the International Monetary Fund in order to get the world into debt, which then can be used in order to blackmail people. And if you don't follow those blackmails, as we'll be covering in the macro section, you end up on the wrong side of war, death, and destruction, because the proof of weapons network is built upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme that requires death, destruction, and violence in order to survive. And so if you are using Bitcoin in order to use those financial weapons, mass destruction, in order to try and end up with more Bitcoin, then you might be on the wrong side of a liquidation and the manipulation of those that control the money to manipulate the price short term so that they end up with all the long-term gains. There was $5.7 billion worth of Bitcoin and Ethereum options that expire today. There was billions of dollars of liquidations from those that were leveraging debt to try and just speculate on the price of Bitcoin. Imagine being given the gift and it is disrespected so badly by fiat currency money printers that don't understand the value of Bitcoin in order to just try and end up with more shitty fiat currency, which is causing all the wars and problems that we are experiencing in the world today. That is why right now we are at record levels of depression, suicide, degeneracy, debt, and we are building a humankind which is trying to figure out how to deal with the pension crisis by launching all sorts of covert operations, which is leading to low birth rates and the destruction of humanity. That is how the incentives of the proof of weapon network work. Now, if you have been following my content all along, you'll know that your job, if you accept the challenge, is to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, which means you can't lever it up because you might violate your rules. Remember the one time when I broke my rules, I fell for the trick of taking a tiny percentage of my Bitcoin, borrowing against it. I ended up depositing it at Celsius, taking a loan against it, and ended up having that Bitcoin destroyed to teach me the lesson. Simon, don't mess around. Bitcoin is the resistance against the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Don't mess around with the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And yet everybody is being fooled into it right now, especially as more and more financial institutions want you to deposit your Bitcoin with them. And when they deposit your Bitcoin with them, they want you to take a loan against it. And when you take a loan against it, they want to construct a derivative product in order to pay fiat currency interest in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that always leads to the same result. And if you are fortunate enough and lucky enough to exit it at the right time, in this less than zero-sum game, just like the casino where the house always wins, the printers of the fiat currency always win that game, and you might escape velocity, but you don't need to do that. So your job is to end up with more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And if you follow that rule, every single person that has done that will be watching this little correction and saying, I get to buy more Bitcoin with my fiat currency 25% cheaper than what I bought it last month. And that is how you win the game. That is how you take down the Fed. That is how you live outside the care of the fiat currency price of Bitcoin. And you get to hack the system with the gift that Satoshi Nakamoto gave us, backed up by the world's largest distributed supercomputer called Bitcoin Proof of Work that no government can take down, no central bank can take down. They tried. They had to create a PSYOP in 2022 where the Federal Reserve created a pump and dump scheme in order to say, hey, BlackRock, we'll gift you. We're going to put corrupt regulators in the SEC and we'll gift you some Bitcoin so that you can persuade people to put their money and hold it through your ETF so that you can catch up because you laughed at us and basically you had to join us. But you use the old weapons, and hopefully anybody that is watching these videos does not fall for those weapons. And if you are new, welcome. We cover and break it down every single week so that you don't fall for the same tricks. And incredibly sadly, here are some stories, because some people use these fiat currency money printing versions of blockchain assets and meme coins and shitcoin casinos and leverage futures options rather than just sticking with Bitcoin. In fact, we had one message in the blockchain. His name, if you didn't see it, was Hugh Lindsay. And Hugh Lindsay, I believe from China, purposely burnt $1.6 million of ETH and donated $5.3 million worth of Bitcoin to WikiLeaks. And Lindsay basically said and put a message in the blockchain because I believe suffering from such mental illness that we end up doing crazy stuff when we engage in these fiat currency money printing games as well. So Lenzi, basically, he embedded a secret story in his transaction, because you can send a message with your transaction, and basically explained how, in his words, he's been taken over by mind control since birth. And he was trying to send us a message, and he ended up sending all his Bitcoin to WikiLeaks. While we appreciate the contribution, we need people to stay mentally strong. And the way people stay mentally strong is they stay away from the drugs and the products of fiat currency that take people down these destructive paths and take us into these dark places. Well, anyway, whether it was a message because there was real mind control being engaged and he was sending us a message, or whether there's mental illness, we do not know. But at the same time, I saw hack, which is being attributed to the North Korean group Lazarus. Apparently, the FBI came out and said and confirmed that this is state-sponsored hacking from North Korean group Lazarus. I'm not sure whether that's one big whole psyop anyway, because I don't trust anything anymore after everything that we've been learning how the world works. But anyway, they took responsibility for the Bybit hack, and fortunately Bybit said that they had enough to actually cover it. Now, let me just go through a little bit deeper into the Bybit hack, because now we got more details. Basically, users panicked as soon as the hack was understood, and they withdrew approximately $4 billion from the exchange, which, by the way, if you are storing money on an exchange, it's because you are engaging in the cancer of fiat with your Bitcoin. You're either engaging in the altcoin casinos, money printed, pre-mined, whatever they may be, or you're using leverage and you're storing them at a Bitcoin. Because if you are just storing them at an exchange, then 50% had to withdraw them because it was probably their money there in order to leverage and trade. But anyway, so that was, they were held on the exchange. About 50% of it was withdrawn, which was the value of about $4 billion. So we're led to believe that there was about $8 billion being stored on the exchange. And we got the correction. Now, the correction was weaker than any correction I've seen. And this was the largest heist, probably in the banking system, but definitely in the cryptocurrency sector, that we have ever seen as well. Now, I do have to say, having seen how they handled the situation, you can say whatever you want about what the exchange and whether it should have happened in the first place, and you can people will investigate. But once the hack had actually happened, the way they treated it was exceptionally well. And I do have to give credit for that. Now, the lesson obviously is never store your exchange, never store at an exchange. Ideally, learn self-custody of your Bitcoin, and that is the way to go. But even if you are going to be, you're not ready for self-custody, in our Bitcoin Wealth Builder program, we teach everyone how to get a self-custody setup, which we're going to be doing later this year. We do it every 4-year cycle, and I'm going to be doing the next one later this year. But even if you're not ready for self-custody yet, at least use some kind of qualified custody service, not an exchange. The exchange is worse because they're creating all these fiat currency futures products, and they've got chain after chain after chain. They got coin after coin after coin, rather than having a simple setup designed for custody with audit requirements, and not having to use those coins for different types of products. And anyway, but the hack happened because Bybit had what they explained as a 3-wallet setup. The first is that they had a hot wallet, which is how you process very fast withdrawals, which is connected to the platform, connected online. You normally, as an exchange, minimize the amount in hot wallet. Now, a custodian would have a longer time to withdraw, like a Bank to the Future, because we don't hold large sums in the hot wallet. And it's more designed for people that are looking to do the storage rather than do the trading. They have a warm wallet, which is a a structure whereby it requires biometrics of multiple people, but it is connected and codified. And then they had a cold wallet set up. Now, the cold wallet was disconnected, is completely outside of the Bybit system, but it requires a multi-signature in the case of Ethereum. Now, when it comes to Ethereum, unlike Bitcoin, you really, more and more people engage in programmatic versions of Ethereum, and they have these things called smart contracts. Now, some of that does exist on top of Bitcoin, but it's a very, very different environment. Now, when the founder of the exchange, which is required in a multi-signature environment, they had to sign the signature to move approximately 30,000 ETH in order to top up the warm wallet. He had to sign that with his Ledger wallet. And so that was done with the Ledger wallet, but because it's multi-signature, it has a smart contract on top. Scenarios where the multi-signature opened up different attack vectors, and the North Korean Lazarus hacking group were able to get through that. And rather than just taking the 30,000 ETH, it turned out that it was actually all of the ETH that was on that cold wallet, which was 400,000 ETH. Now, they claim that all other ETH wallets were fine, and that they had their warm wallet set up with, safe wallet and various other things. But the breach was because of the multi-signature wallet. So I don't want to go too geeky into this stuff, but there's lessons to learn there. And when we work, in the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program, helping people set up their cold storage, you have to consider these various things, and it's why the simple strategies are often the best in order to escape velocity from the proof of weapons network. The CFO allegedly confirmed to the CEO that they could cover the ETH amount. So immediately he knew that they had enough ETH in order to cover it, but they knew that there would be a run on the bank. And when there was a run on the bank, they needed to, one, work on the public statements, and secondly, make sure that when people are withdrawing, they don't have to stop withdrawals, which means you need to make further transactions. And if you can't do them fast enough, it can create a panic. And you end up with a situation, as we've seen with other exchanges, where they halt withdrawals and then maybe they're not in a position to cover it. But in this case, they said they were in a position to cover it. So immediately, once they knew they could cover it and they agreed to cover it, they did some public statements. And he came on a video and did an AMA, explained exactly what happened, and prepared for the bank run so that they could process all withdrawals. That required borrowing some against the collateral, whatever it needs to be. I don't want to unwind all of that, but that's why you don't store at exchanges, because that's the types of things that happen when you're dealing with exchanges that have leveraged products. That is very different from a custodian, which is simply storing it for you without having to create all these products on top that create all these compromise layers. Well, anyway, about 50% was withdrawn. So it proved that at least they had enough to cover the 50%. For all I know, all withdrawals were processed. Maybe some would be saying otherwise, but that seems to be the case. And then they launched a $140 million recovery bounty program for anybody that can participate in helping recover any of the cryptos. Now, remember, at Bank to the Future, we supported Bitfinex in the 2016 hack, where there was a hole and they did need to halt withdrawals. And they launched a debt token where you could lend the money to the exchange, and that was convertible into shares in the company. And we actually produced one of the best recoveries out there, because the token traded a low at 30 cents. And then the shares ended up at a peak of about $16 and paid out lots of dividends from the profits and various other things. But, in this case, they were able to go straight back up, cover the funds. This is the largest hack in history. Now, that is what led to the correction. At the same time, as we'll be covering in the macro section, we're having the dismantling of the fiat currency proof of weapons network and a transition to a world of artificial intelligence-backed stablecoins that I've always been talking about and preparing people for over these years. So anyway, that's what happened at the Bybit side. So you've got the correction from the traditional market at the same time as the largest hack. And so far, we've stabilized around 80,000. Maybe it goes back further. Maybe it doesn't. Some people will say, I need to hit my target at 60,000 until I buy. And then others that are trying to do that, maybe it never gets there, which is why the strategy that's always worked for myself and other investors is just buy each month at whatever the price is. And continue to do that and own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And then you can engage in a little bit more complex things once you've done that habit for at least 4 years, I would say, from all of the investors that I've seen that have life-changing wealth based upon those simple strategies. Now, as I said, we actually had this mental illness stuff because those that are on the wrong side of the fiat currency proof of weapons network that are messing around with all these meme coins and pre-coins and all sorts, pre-mined coins. There was a crypto trader that I saw. It was a really, and I don't know whether it's fake or real, but it looked pretty damn real to me. You don't know with deep fakes today. But somebody came on, a crypto trader, and on a video took his own life because he lost a bunch of money or what was a large money to him. On this meme coin, shitcoin casino that is the Pump Fun, and he did it on live stream in front of everybody. It was really disturbing to watch, whether it was real or not, but it looked pretty real to me. But on the video, he lost $500, which was a lot of money that he had built up. He was messing around in meme coins and various other things. He loaded up a gun on the video. And then he said on the video, if I die, make me a meme coin. And then proceeded to actually trigger the revolver live on a video so that other people could create a meme coin. Now, I don't know whether that meme coin was created. I was so disturbed by what I watched that I stopped investigating any further. But it just makes me think how many people on the wrong side of the fiat currency proof of weapons network are going down the wrong path rather than taking the gift of Bitcoin. And we're starting to get, North Korean hackers and messages from people in blockchains as they contribute all their money to WikiLeaks and suicides on camera. It's truly, truly sad. And we need to make sure that more and more people have the long-term vision that Bitcoin gives you, the time preference to be able to understand that there is an escape velocity, the information they need to understand that we've been lied to by our media, lied to by our governments, but there is hope on the other side that they don't end up doing this. And talking about craziness, we also had Kanye West came out and said that he's going to launch his own blockchain and that he's going to putting tweets out there that he's going to launch some kind of meme coin connected to Nazism and various other things. And then suddenly he said he's going to launch them next week. And then he deletes all of his tweets and disappears. And apparently he sold all of his accounts as we get this disgusting things, this crazy types of behavior. We need people with, able to escape the proof of weapons network, able to bring a level of hope and vision for the future, because this has always been the game of a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Those that constructed the debt-based Ponzi scheme. We need mental stability in the world. We need people with strong hands. And I have found that when money becomes less of an issue for you because you're not stuck to a depreciating fiat currency that rewards those that leverage debt, that you're able to create a resistance against all of the tricks that come from that. And we've hit record highs in suicide rates, as I said. And I think it's because the governments have lied to us so much. And now we're going through that cleansing moment where people are starting to get more and more of the truth. And the central banks, they're essentially, working to what's the next strategy? What's the next agenda? They've got the whole world deep in debt. When the whole world is deep in debt, you get wealth inequality. When you get wealth inequality, you wipe out the middle class. When you wipe out the middle class, you get the rich richer, the poor poorer, and then no one to buy the products of the rich. And so they become more and more crony capitalists. And then they bribe politicians in order to engineer the system in their way. And they've got their escape plan anyway. The others are getting closer and closer down the debt cycle in a debt trap, enslaved to the system, and end up looking for meme coins in order to try and get some escape velocity away from it. So what are the lessons? The solutions to exchange hacks is self-custody at the very least, or at least if you're not ready for that, go with a qualified custodian that's not constructing derivative products and debt-based products on top of pristine collateral or pristine Bitcoin. The solution to liquidations, which is what causes the crash when everyone's trying to use derivatives, is just don't leverage. Don't use it. You don't need to. The returns from Bitcoin, not financial advice, have been too great to even need to play in those games, as long as you create a longer term strategy for yourself. And the solution to price crashes is just do not trade. And don't go too deep into the shitcoin casino, which are designed, almost all of them are designed to part away from the pre-mined money printers and the VC insiders that are getting favorable terms in order to part you away from your shitcoins so they can convert it into Bitcoin, and you end up with no Bitcoin on the other side of it, because that's what they actually wanted. The decentralized Bitcoin proof of work network, the ability to own your own money with no bank in the middle, the ability to send it with no government permission, and the ability to hold it with a fixed supply and a monetary policy that no central bank can change. So after watching all of this anyway, it gave me a bit of a kick up the arse on the urgency trying to get the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program out and make sure everyone's got the tools that they need. Right, let's move on from all of that stuff. It's a very important message. That's how you handle the crashes. The crashes are really exciting. If this lasts lower and lower prices for longer, it means that is your opportunity to accumulate the Bitcoin when everyone else is trying to buy it at record highs. That's the time, that you get better value for your fiat currency if you have the simple principles. So now we need to recollaborate and reprogram our brains into what is actually happening right now. The sheer amount of news that is coming out of the world right now as we witness the dismantling of the fiat currency proof of weapons network, and we see countries trying to adjust to this. We had So the Biden administration was doing the bid of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve installed Gary Gensler in order to create a corrupt environment within our sector and sue all of the players so that they could do the bidding for the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, take out the banks that were servicing crypto companies in Operation Choke Point 2.0, and then use a inflation is transitory hike to use the bond markets in order to crash those banks, bail out the ones they wanted to support, and essentially wipe out the shitcoin casinos that they installed, like Sam Bankman-Fried FTX and Alex Majinsky's Celsius, and wipe them out, and then use that in order to hand people or the industry to try and trick people into taking their Bitcoin and handing it over to custody with BlackRock. Now, that was the PSYOP. But we are witnessing the dismantling of that PSYOP right now. And it has been a recognition that the US dollar needs to reform, as I've always laid out over the years. Before I was a Bitcoiner, I was a monetary reformer, exposing the proof of weapons network. Now it is imploding upon itself. There will be, I believe, an impending tension between the creator, the Federal Reserve, the perpetrator that took over constitutional America and replaced it with a debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme based upon the model of the Bank of England. All of those SEC investigations, the Federal Reserve did that, And now the new administration has recognized we actually need all of that stuff, because Bitcoin and stable coins are our way of transitioning out of a broken system. And so now there has been a halt, and the Trump administration has come along and said, right, let's change that. Let's hand over the ability to create the dollar, whereby we can issue treasuries, back it by stable coins, and hand over those stable coins to the technocrats. And then we'll invest in retreating to artificial intelligence and make sure we get our energy markets, our rare earth markets, our semiconductor chips all in line with data centers across the region, so that we can then make sure that we do the bidding of the technocrats and hand them over stable coins that can then take on the banks through full reserve banking rather than fractional reserve banking, because we're now changing to an artificial intelligence based system rather than a proof of weapons network that requires death, destruction, and is being exposed. So we are witnessing the exposure of all of the constructs of the deep state that allowed everything to happen. And now the SEC is saying, right, new people, let's gut out the old, put in the new, let's embrace this industry, and let's make sure that we have a good environment within America to harness some of this entrepreneurial capital to build the technology that's needed to remain competitive. So the brakes were pushed on. The SEC leadership has all changed, and now all of the SEC investigations are being reversed one at a time. We had announcements. Consensus, which is the parent company of MetaMask, the SEC case gone. Coinbase, SEC case gone. Gemini, SEC case dropped. Robinhood, SEC case dropped. Uniswap, SEC case dropped. Decentralized exchanges. OpenSea, NFT marketplace, the SEC case dropped. Now there's one missing, which I hope we're going to see soon, because I'm also a shareholder in that company, which is Kraken. And for some reason, we haven't seen that one. Hopefully, we shall see that soon. But we saw an awful one, which exposes the corruption of the system. So make sure you understand that we are replacing one form of problem with another form of problem. And this one is the crony capitalism from the crypto bros. So one of the cases that was dropped with the SEC is the case against Tron and Justin Sun. Now, Justin's son is somebody that was engaging in the take a copy of Ethereum, press copy and paste, launch your own blockchain, pre-mine yourself, make yourself rich, and try and create a use case, cheaper, faster, better, and say we're better than ETH, we're better than Bitcoin, and then use that money in order to get as much Bitcoin as you can. And as Bitcoin goes up, you invest in building power. It's like the new lobby group from the crypto mafia, as it were. Justin Sun was one of those people. He created Tron, executed the model, ended up acquiring exchanges like Poloniex, which is a crypto-to-crypto exchange, I believe had a hole, and then acquiring like Huobi, which was one of the large exchanges in China. And then there was an investigation because essentially he was using these stable coins to probably cover up holes and try and make money in order to plug those holes. And that investigation is dropped. Why was it dropped? Well, we know, if you're a long-term watcher of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that Trump, through World Liberty Financial, which has shareholders with Steve Witkoff, who's representing America in the negotiations in the Middle East and various other foreign relations, is also, that company is looking to launch a stable coin and a DeFi platform and a governance token. Essentially Trump's family are the main beneficiaries to that. So I'm sure Trump's looking at what is the reform of the financial system. I want to make sure that my family owns it as we construct this new, stablecoin based model that's going to emerge. He was doing a token sale to raise 300 million, and it wasn't doing too well, as you know. But suddenly Justin's son agreed to invest 75 million. And after investing 75 million, suddenly it went up to 300 million and it was oversubscribed. And then the 5 cents price suddenly became about 50 cents. Sorry if I got the prices wrong. but I think it was like a 10x more or something like that. I'll have to go back through old notes. You can put in the comments if you know. But anyway, it said that we're going to now raise another 200 million, and now they ended up with 500 million, and they ended up buying wrap Bitcoin and all sorts of other stuff in order to get a ride on top. Remember what I told you, the number one use case of these things is to part you from your Bitcoin, so they end up with their Bitcoin. Now they wrap it in ETH and all sorts of things that they do. But anyway, they ended up raising 500 million, and Justin Sun was the person that helped that happen. And lo and behold, we have this Justin Sun and the SEC case drop there. Now, I might be connecting dots. That's what we do. It's somewhat speculative. But remember, don't rule out the possibility that the other crypto lobbies will eventually decide that Justin Sun is no longer a useful weapon, and will say he's part of the Chinese Communist Party in order to try and wipe him out, to make sure that the money that is being slushed around with the US government ends up in their project, as rather than just focusing on Bitcoin strategic reserves, America's saying we're going to have a crypto stockpile. And the crypto lobbies are all trying to make sure that their fiat currency money printing shitcoin casino is part of the strategic stockpile of America. Anyway, at the same time, the SEC met with Michael Saylor last week, and that was to discuss establishing a framework for digital assets. And look, we know how the game works. Follow the money. Michael Saylor really wasn't into Bitcoin. Michael Saylor got into Bitcoin, and then Michael Saylor used a company, a software company, which was around during the dot-coms. And we know that the internet companies that are around in the dot-coms tend to have access to technology that is used in order to, from, whether it's military or government contracts. And so he's got a data software company, goes through the whole dot-com boom and bust, 2008 financial crisis, and then uses Bitcoin in order to create a strategy to utilize and scoop up as much Bitcoin for the company. And because people weren't able to invest in Bitcoin before the SEC and the Fed and FDIC did Operation Choke Point 2.0, people were buying MicroStrategy shares instead until they approved the BlackRock ETFs. And so now it's accumulated approximately 500,000 Bitcoin, 500,000 Bitcoin. And once you are that big and strategically important, you become an asset of the deep state at some point. And so probably MicroStrategy is going to be changing into a crypto bank. And then it's going to be looking at how people can borrow against their Bitcoin and construct fiat currency proof of weapons products on top of that Bitcoin accumulation. And if it turns out that America needs to strategically, like it did during the Federal Reserve pump and dump, remember in the 1920s, the Federal Reserve got World War I. Then after World War I, you had peace in 2018. Then it pushed into using debt-based Ponzi scheme to try and get all the bucket shops to get you to buy stocks on derivatives, and the birth of the derivatives markets for speculation. And then they use interest rates in order to crash the market, accumulate those stocks at a significant discount, and then drive the world into the Great Depression of the 1930s. And in 1933, they said, everybody that has gold, you need to convert your gold into $20 of Federal Reserve notes, which was later repriced into $35 of Federal Reserve notes. And then they managed to get all of the gold from the people and give them a fiat currency proof of weapons network instead. Now we're being asked to audit Fort Knox, see if the gold is still there. That was probably some of it part of the original confiscations, but we don't know what paper contracts the Federal Reserve put on top of that. And as we are witnessing the dismantling of that network, maybe it will, be audited. We'll cover a bit more about that when we get into the macro. Anyway, that could happen with those that own MicroStrategy. It could be nationalized, where if America needs to strategically reform its money, end up with a bunch of Bitcoin, it could decide that it will nationalize MicroStrategy. And it could be that at this stage, Michael Saylor, when you get to a certain point, strategically important, you become an asset of the deep state. And he may be one of those technocrats or deep state. We do not know. Or he may be just a genuine person that has done an incredible job in order to get more and more people into Bitcoin, but do it in the corporate level as well. We shall keep watching, but I'm very skeptical. And, it is a difference between owning Bitcoin yourself and owning it through a stock. Anyway, so he met with the SEC to come up with this framework. And, it's digital assets rather than Bitcoin, which is interesting in itself. That's the direction that everything's going within America as well. And the SEC came out and gave more guidance. They said that meme coins are not securities. So what this means is that all the Huat2s and all of the Trump meme coins and Melania meme coins and the Milei meme coins, which was launched by the same sniper that is designed in order to take some Bitcoin from you or end up with the currency that they wanted, they're no longer securities. And so therefore it fits in with the definition of if you commit fraud, you commit fraud. And we will see what happens there. But they are not under the remit of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And finally, we are getting clarity on what fits in where. And this is the first one. So meme coins, if you commit fraud, then you are subject to all the consequences of committing fraud. But it is not a regulated product, because the SEC doesn't want to engage in whack-a-mole like a war they can't win with these millions and millions of meme coins and having to come after people that launch these meme coins in that type of environment. Okay, so I would see this the first early signs that this technology is moving so fast that regulators can't catch up. If you've been a long-term listener, you'll know that I believe eventually artificial intelligence and technology will only be able to catch up with other artificial intelligence, and central bankers will become artificial intelligence through central bank digital currencies. Stable coins will become artificial intelligence. Regulators will become artificial intelligence. And eventually there will be no budget because tax collection just becomes unfeasible. And eventually, if we keep this proof of weapon network alive, it will eventually be replaced with an artificial intelligence network that will need proof of work to resist against it. And those that get their chunk of the proof of work network, while Bitcoin's on sale at the moment, by owning more Bitcoin each month, will be the ones that are able to get on the right side and defeat the proof of weapons network as it evolves. And of course, we'll cover it as the whole thing unfolds. But anyway, the SEC said meme coins, we'll leave it to law. It's not within the permit of the SEC. What are they going to focus on next? They're going to be focusing on stable coins. And obviously the Fed will want to get a look in there and then watch the battle ensue. That will take some time. And then they're going to be working on market structure, which means meme coins are unregulated. What's a security? What's a stable coin? What's Bitcoin? When is it a commodity? When is it a security? That's going to be structured so that everybody can have clarity in terms of moving forward as well. So that will be market structure. And then we'll see whether we get this Bitcoin strategic reserve and whether America is going to hedge itself against the Federal Reserve, as I've always been advocating for. And other countries get to front run that. The Middle East can use Bitcoin. BRICS can use it to back up their global South network rather than just using gold. You can solve the problem of the auditability and storage of gold in a distributed ledger system by backing it by an element of Bitcoin. The European Union can use it in order to protect themselves from each individual country in the dismantling of the European Central Bank, which is a Fed-first proof of weapons network institution that has essentially destroyed Europe for the benefit of the American military-industrial complex and raged these wars, which is the Ukraine stuff. We'll cover more of that in the macro section. But anyway, all these countries get to protect themselves, but you don't need to worry what governments do. You can protect yourself anyway, and you can sit outside the system. Now, there were rumors, and I don't know whether this is true because it could just be bad journalism. It's hard to tell the difference unless you're following the money between the truth and reality. But somebody put out there, and so fact check it yourself, that the Biden administration and the US Marshal Service have lost track of the Bitcoins that they are meant to earn that could be transferred as strategic reserves. And this really led off a spark of theories on whether they were stolen or not. I don't know whether there's any truth to it. But either way, that is a story that we will continue to follow, whether it's fake news or not. I guess we may end up in a scenario where Biden, of course, says they were lost in a boating accident and I've lost my mind right now, and they were stored on Hunter Biden's laptop. We shall see. I'm not sure what the truth is to that. I think that we have seen over time that the Silk Road coins, for example, have been sold off, and there were recovered coins which are going to the Bitfinex shareholders after the 2016 hack that I covered earlier. But MicroStrategy, anyway, now, which is now known as Strategy, they're still accumulating Bitcoin into the market. So they accumulated and announced this week another 20,356 Bitcoin. At the time was worth $1.99 billion, has corrected since then. And so they've now acquired, after that, additional 20,365 worth 1.9 billion. That was at a price of an average of 97,514 per Bitcoin. Currently, the price is about 80,000. And as of the 23rd of February, 2025, they hold 499,096 Bitcoin, which they have acquired at a price of approximately valued at approximately 33.1 billion that they've acquired it for, which is an average of 66,357 per Bitcoin. So that's an interesting one to watch. Now, we are seeing more and more fiat currency money printers looking to hedge and join our industry. And remember, I talked about the public companies last week, if you're a long-term watcher. And one of those, as I said, is that GameStop is announcing that it's going to be doing a Bitcoin strategy. And it may be similar to MicroStrategy. It may be different. We shall see. But that is a rumor because they got about $4.6 billion of reserves and a very interesting community of shareholders. Now, remember the whole, short squeeze and manipulation of price. Well, one of those that were firing those financial weapons of mass destruction was the hedge fund manager, Citadel. And Citadel Securities, another division that looks to get into custody, has decided that it's going to be getting into custody of Bitcoin. And it's going to be doing other crypto liquidity providers for major exchanges. So it's looking at getting into market making, aka market manipulation, in the short term. And they're going to be doing liquidity for Coinbase and Binance and Crypto.com and other exchanges as they look to basically sign the devil contract with those companies, which is why I wouldn't be storing any funds over there. Full disclosure, I am a shareholder in Coinbase, and it is, but I would still not be storing funds over there, and make sure that if you're doing it in custody, it is segregated from these exchanges, which are using Citadel in order to gauge in market making, in order to do short-term manipulation of prices and all the shenanigans that we are used to. And remember, this announcement was right after the GameStop announcement. So maybe that is a coincidence, but I don't really believe in coincidence as well. Remember, there's another story as we come to the end of the Bitcoin section and transition over to the macro section. But Trump has been suggesting all week that the gold might not be at Fort Knox, and therefore it requires an audit. And him and Elon are going to go there with a camera and find out whether the gold has been stolen, whether it's there, or whatever it may be. Now, this could be taken in two different ways. Firstly, the lesson is, if this was done with Bitcoin like El Salvador does it, then they publish their public address, and you can see all the Bitcoin, and you can see they're adding 1 Bitcoin every day, and they have complete auditability, accountability to the shareholders of their country, which is the average person that is a citizen contributing tax to that country. So Bitcoin solves that problem. Really is the only way, is the only path forward in order to add that layer of transparency, because you can trust the network. But this could go in one of two directions. Either, as per what I've covered in previous, that this is a strategic weakening of the dollar that we'll cover in the macro section a bit more. And so one way to weaken the dollar so that you can do more onshoring and rebuild your manufacturing base would be to show that there's some gold missing, which is a sign of strength of part of what gives the dollar its strength. And so, it could be a strategy of saying some of the gold's not there, therefore it's a way of weakening the dollar without having something like a Plaza Accord where currencies have to be devalued against each other. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but this is one way of doing it. The other is that Trump maybe knows it's there, and by knowing that it's there, he could decide to strengthen the dollar. And this could be a strategic tool at being able to have some level of control over whether it's devaluing the currency or strengthening the currency based upon all of the tariff strategies that are coming right now. So if Trump knows that the gold isn't there, which I'm sure he would know, I don't think he would do this strategy accidentally and leave it to chance, then this could be a way of weakening or strengthening the dollar, whichever direction it needs to go. This is another tool, again, that goes into my thought process that there may be build as many tools as possible with Treasury as the dismantling of the proof of weapons network with the Federal Reserve is a possibility and a transition. And so anyway, that's a one way of doing it. So I think it becomes an interesting story for us to follow. But the other story to follow, which leads us into our macro section and the other part that we want to cover with Jeffrey Epstein and what that is and how it actually relates to this fiat currency proof of weapons network, is that we had Kash Patel immediately sworn in, and he is now officially a pro-Bitcoin FBI director, which would like to expose many of the constructs of the deep state. And therefore, the first job was to make sure that we get the files on Jeffrey Epstein. Now, that may sound like something that is slightly unrelated, but actually, as you know, all of this plugs into each other. So that's going to do everything on the This Week in Bitcoin section in part 1. And we're now going to move over to part 2, where we cover This Week in Macro. And we're going to start with actually the relevance of the Jeffrey Epstein file drop and how it relates to the construct of the fiat currency proof of weapons network, and how we can look forward to trying to unpack what might come next. So do me a favor. If you enjoyed the Bitcoin section, please can you like, share, retweet. I'm going to grab a little bit of water right now. I'm currently fasting, so I just had a little bit of break on my fast, but I need to make sure I keep my energy up with water. And here's a favor that I'm going to ask for you. So many people watch this video right to the end and are not subscribers on my YouTube channel. So whether you're watching this at X, please head over to my YouTube channel. I am trying slowly like a snail to get over 100,000 subscribers. You'll know that I was on a very fast growth pace. And as soon as I started unearthing certain parts of the proof of weapons network, I got shadow banned. And now if I get over 100,000, I get to review it with a blue check. And now many of what I've been sharing was censored before is now becoming fact. I think we can get a little review. So we had a bunch of you subscribe. Please hit the bell symbol. Please hit all. Please subscribe so that I can reverse the impact of my high growth that then so clearly got suppressed. And I can get that review, and we can get more and more of this message out there so that more and more people are able to protect themselves as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. So please do that for me right now. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all if you're already a subscriber. Please do retweet, repost, share, get more people in, add a comment. It helps the algorithm when people do that review. And I'm going to take a bit of water and we're going to go into part 2 this week in macro. Hold there 1 second. Okay, we are now in part 2 this week in macro. We laid the foundation with everything that happened this week in Bitcoin. If you're not watching that, you can go back to part 1. We'll put the different videos chopped up, and later we'll add some timestamps as well. But the US released this week the first file drop, which they already did a chunk of it under the Biden administration. And Ryan Dawson, for many, many years, had already revealed a lot of it as well. But they released the Jeffrey Epstein flight logs, which is everyone that was on the Jeffrey Epstein plane with Jeffrey Epstein, and the client list as well. And there was a massive kerfuffle designed at really distracting you from the reality. What I want to do is make sure that you're not distracted by all of the drama and all of the distractions, and you're first on what I want you to see, because we follow the money, and then I want to tie it into the macro picture and the general strategy as well. For those of you that don't know, we have covered this for a long time on the show. And at first it got me shadow banned for talking about it, but now it's becoming absolutely obvious and fact. And that is that Jeffrey Epstein, a Mossad agent, was state-sponsored blackmail rings that essentially work for the Israeli government through Mossad in order to blackmail governments, influential people, influencers, and various other people in order to leverage power over governments, media networks, and corporations through sex trafficking and lobbying. And this is a very clear, and this is why intelligence agencies were set up with MI6 and the CIA in order to protect corporate interests and many of the human trafficking and drug trafficking rings that has been exposed in front of our very eyes. Now, you will notice that the only thing they won't tell you, or they won't highlight while exposing most of the things, is that this is so clearly a Mossad operation, and it is deeply connected to the Israeli government, which is a construct that I've covered many, many times of intelligence agencies in order to engage in using jurisdictional arbitrage to perform vital parts of the proof of weapons network, which is toppling governments, creating violence across regions in order to ensure that certain parts of dollar demands are upholded. And you can do things like construct the petrodollar, where all of the Middle Eastern oil is denominated in dollars in order to push treasuries and be able to issue more and more dollars, which is the construct of the proof of weapons network, to get more and more debt out there. So the government can borrow more and more and more so that it can then invest it in who the lobby groups that are bribing politicians and blackmailing politicians, make sure the money goes into the corporations so that middle class America essentially pays the inflation, while the corrupt crony capitalists end up with all the money and the benefits of the proof of weapons network. Jeffrey Epstein was an agent, and it is pure manipulation of middle-class America, as I've said, to pay the bill so that money can get into the military-industrial complex. And we've covered that many, many times. So now you understand that that this demand for dollars and this fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme, they are willing to go to the depths, and I can only describe this as satanic, of child pornography and child raping and child human trafficking in order to create a honeypot to capture influential people in order to bribe them, in order to get what they want, just so that they can construct the debt-based Ponzi scheme in the way that they want to create it. This model, as I said, was created. I'll go briefly into it. I'm not going to go deep into it because I've covered it so many times. It was created by the Bank of England. It was exported to the US, and it needed World War I in order to get there. There were 2 attempts at infiltrating constitutional America with central banks. Remember, that was what the Declaration of Independence. It was a war against central banks when you study history correctly. And in order to get, once the Federal Reserve was constructed within America, it constructed the debt-based Ponzi scheme. It needed World War I in order to construct the previous world order. It bankrupted the UK government as it transitioned all the gold over to Fort Knox. The Bank of England was a construct that was later used many years later to take influential families like the Rothschilds and construct this system across the different networks in Europe. And then, make sure that its families and its allies were used in order to construct the Fed to replace what looked like capitalism into debt slavery and socialism, where it could have an endless money printing press to fund wars at the expense of the US government and get the middle class to pay for it so that it could end up on the right side of all of the proof of weapons network. If you remember, I talked about it after constructing the Fed, the Bank of England, and after World War I, the Bank for International Settlements. It also created the Bolshevik Revolution, which was the replacement of the Russian Tsar with the Soviet Union that took communist ideology so that the families could fund both sides of the war. So you had the replacement of capitalism with the Federal Reserve, and then you had the Soviet Union through the Bolshevik Revolution, funded by the same families and Wall Street, in order to create the communist ideology as well, and within the replace Russia with the Soviet Union. And then at the same time, MI6 and the British government granted Walt Rothschild, a Zionist, an occupation of Palestine in order to build the jurisdiction called Israel, which then was slowly handed over after World War I and World War II. And we've had a slow expansion of the territory until we got to the stage where we almost ended up in World War III through covert operations that required the Cold War and the fake war on terror as psyops from intelligence agencies in order to justify. And there was a resistance against that came from proof of work with Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto, and also the constructs of BRICS, which was a resistance against that as well, to try and create a multipolar world as well. Well, anyway, it needed World War I and World War II in order to build that. It needed the Bank for International Settlements. It needed the IMF and the World Bank to get the world addicted to dollar debt. And then you needed the United Nations to come after anyone that was resisting it, which then ended up imploding upon itself because the International Criminal Court actually now went against the constructs that it was designed to protect, like war criminal Netanyahu at the moment. And so then America had to fight back by sanctioning it because it was meant to go for those people. It wasn't meant to be used against us. Well, welcome to the Proof of Weapons Network. And that's what we've always done. It is designed to prop up the global world reserve currency, and the demand for dollars artificial. It created the petrodollar, as we've covered. It created the euro dollar, and the euro dollar is basically coming into the question at the moment as we start to enter to the end of much of the war and debt slavery that is needed in order to prop it up. Well, Jeffrey Epstein was a vital part of importing illegal weapons when JFK was assassinated and Lyndon B. Johnson took over and was, basically importing weapons that led to the war in '67 that allowed for the expansion of the territory. And Jeffrey Epstein and the constructs of all of the different people that were involved in that. If you read Whitney Webb's book, One Nation Under Blackmail, in painful detail over 2 volumes, it goes all the banks that were involved, all the people that were involved. And, it's a hard read, but it had references that were designed in setting up this network. And Epstein was there in order to ensure that any resistance against it, like when Bill Clinton wanted to support the Palestinian cause, it got a blackmail ring to make sure that that never happened, so that territory could be expanded. Anyway, Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in prison now, was a vital part of the network, and her father, who was assassinated and just suddenly fell down died in a boating accident. You'll see all these names as we start to deconstruct it. Wexner, which was the one that made Jeffrey Epstein look like he was rich and said, you can move from Bear Stearns, which was another construct, of the 2008 financial crisis and the Lehman Brothers Chapter 11. It was designed at transferring all of those assets, the good assets, over to the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like JP Morgan and various other institutions. Wexner is there. Roth is there. Brofman is there. You'll see these names. Omart is there. Hoffenberg is there. Rubin is there. These are all vital constructs in the blackmail network. Krauss is there. Schroffenstein is there. Steinheit is there. Katzav is there. Khan is there. Sanans is there. Hoffman is there. And basically more and more names. Now, we will, the names are just being released at the moment. But remember, the PSYOP that was done before is to create movies and fictitious environments. Like, for example, the JFK movie was designed to the CIA and corrupt loans and hide the Mossad element to it, just like Fahrenheit and 9/11, the movie, was designed to blame it on the CIA and the Saudis, which they are all part of it because they work together, but take out the Mossad part of it. I think you'll see the same thing happening in this. And that's how you know whether we are actually moving to an environment of deconstructing the proof of weapons network and replacing it with a technocratic stablecoin network instead, powered by artificial intelligence. That's how we'll know, based upon how they reveal this. And in the geopolitical section, I'll make sure I go through specifically what gets revealed and why I think there is a game in the background that is being played when you follow the money through my speculation. And so anyway, the Epstein network was a global network by Mossad, doing the bidding of the Federal Reserve and the US foreign policy, which is designed to construct through intelligence agencies like MI6, CIA, and Mossad to prop up the petrodollar, the euro dollar, and the US dollar proof of weapons network, just as it was for the GBP proof of weapons network prior to the handover with the construct of the Federal Reserve. How do we know this? Well, who's running the actual investigation at the moment? And what is the difference between this? Now, they're going to tell you that Jeffrey Epstein was just a bad guy that constructed this thing. They won't tell you that actually this is integrated into the Israeli government, the British government, and the US government in order to prop up this, what we call deep state network. And it won't tell you that these human trafficking rings, prostitution of children, and absolutely disgusting criminal activity is actually a part of the systemic network of the proof of weapons network. So who do they get in order to release these files? Well, firstly, the Trump administration, which was funded to a large degree by Zionists, and we've followed the money in that as well. But who's hired in order to release the Epstein files? Well, firstly, it's Zionist investigators, Zionist Senate members, Zionist Congress members who have all sworn allegiance to the Israeli government. Zionist influencers were given the ability to release the document and fact check the document before it was actually released, based upon the vote of Zionist Congress members, and released to Zionist journalists that are paid through Zionist funding through US aid and various other constructs that control the media, all under a Zionist president. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm very impressed with many of the acts that President Trump has actually been doing in deconstructing, and he has over-delivered. And that's why I always said you have to vote for Trump rather than Genocide Joe and Holocaust Tarris. But we need to wake up and understand, and once we follow the money, hold accountable, and then understand what types of games might be in played, so we can get away from it. Trump is not a neocon. And that means that the construct of the dollar, which is backed up by death, destruction, and constant forever wars to perpetuate dollars and spend it back on the military industrial complex based upon the Federal Reserve money printing, Trump is not a neocon. He's a businessman that wants to do deals. And a businessman that wants to do deals can see that if you go into world war right now, China wins. And so it's basic strategy and chessboarding to know that China will just sit back in the background while everyone blows each other up and will win the AI war, because it's just the nature of the location and the area in the macro cycle of where China is in terms of its domination of certain industries, rare earth minerals and various other things. So Trump is not a neocon. So he knows, I believe, the Trump administration is getting their orders that the model has changed. If we go to war and we continue to prop up the dollar through war, then China is going to win the AI race, and we need to retreat and we need to catch up and we need to focus purely on that. And in an emergency, the brakes are on. So that means the construct of Mossad and the Israeli government are no longer useful to this model, which is what I covered last week when we are transitioning to the New World Order. And so this requires peace in these regions. And in order to be able to compete, because China has essentially been investing in its own country and its allies. It built the Belt and Road Initiative. It said, we're constructing and we're investing heavily in our own education, our own middle class, our own infrastructure, our own technology, our own robotics, our own manufacturing base, our own relationships with natural gas and oil partners, our own allies and BRICS, and our own manufacturing base, our own exports. And America, in the proof of weapons network, has spent too much resources in crony capitalism, war, death, destruction, and violence. And so that needs to retreat right now, which is what the model that we are seeing right now. And so we have a bit of a problem. You know, the Europeans, which tend to be doing the Russian warmongering right now, of saying we're supporting democracy, their narrative isn't working with the new model. And Israel, the Israeli government, was as a construct to create war, death, destruction across the Middle East, no longer meets in with the strategic goals of the New World Order. And so we are having a bit of a crisis there, where the European leaders are sticking to an old model, and Israel has found itself in a situation where Netanyahu is if it doesn't go into war against the US strategic interest, there's going to be deconstruction of the Israeli government. I'll cover that a little bit deeper in the geopolitical section. And that is being taken on head on right now. And so therefore, I believe that there are two versions of these documents, which is why we're getting delays. One is how to show and expose the Mossad Israeli government side of it. And the other is the one that blames it on the Democrats and the deep state and the CIA. And depending on the negotiations and leverage it is needed right now for America to re-collaborate to its new reality, Trump, which is a Zionist, has to support Israel because that was his backers publicly. But in the background, I think there's a lot of friction where Israel's interest, the Israeli government's interest, and American government's interest are no longer in line. And so therefore, I believe that these documents are being strategically released in order to either blame the Democrats and the CIA or tell the truth around what has been happening with Mossad. So there is a control network where all of those in charge of the information have a massive conflict right now between all those that are blackmailed, all those that received their Israeli lobby campaign financing based upon the money printing of the Fed, versus the American first agenda and the fact that Trump is not a neocon, but is a Zionist. And that is what I think we're witnessing in real time. And which one prevails is a power struggle. And we're seeing plane after plane coming down. But this is a battle between the need for America to build out their data centers at warp speed in the AI race, get access to all the rare earth minerals that are required in order to be able to have the semiconductor chips that currently China has a monopoly on with Taiwan and China and the one China policy. And America recognizes that World War III was not the path to get there because China would have won. So now retreat, retreat, retreat. And it needs all the cheap energy that it can put together after fracking through oil and trying to get the price down for natural gas. And it needs all the rare earth minerals that it can put together in order to win the AI race against China, which is why I believe, based upon this model, we could either go down a very bad path, which is why we may need to, why I believe the US government is looking at how it can expose those or have almost a controlled demolition or a soft landing as it deconstructs the proof of weapons network and moves to this new reality, which is stablecoins built upon AI and all of that is required in order to win that network. That requires the tools of monetary reform, which is why we're seeing stablecoin regulations, market, who's going to be regulating who, gutting out of the system, exposure of USAID, USAID, exposure of the deep state. But there is a massive Zionist control to make sure it's blamed only on America, the CIA, the British Empire, MI6, and not the Israeli government and Mossad, which, because that region wants a very different region. It wants to continue. It wants to draw the US into war with Iran, and it wants an escalation of war because it is acting, I believe, as a double agent, as we know, if all these files get released, that it was responsible for selling much of the American secrets over to China, the military secrets, the China Gate, all that stuff, and then could expose 9/11, JFK, and all the other things that has deep Mossad, Israeli government connections. And so that's what we know. We know that Epstein, when you follow the money and when you follow all the deep research, you know that it was a construct of the proof of weapons network. So the very same disgusting acts for children and everything we have seen this is a moment for truth. Because if we don't have truth, we can't have peace. And this is the opportunity that we all live in today. So you have the choice of either being an agent for psyops and spreading disinformation, or engaging in truth so that truth can heal and we can take out the constructs of the governments and people can go more in line with the values that we think we actually have. And so what happened this week? Well, there was an absolute shit show yesterday. We had influencers, the Zionist supportive influencers, that said, rather than giving it to the Zionist controlled and paid for media, we were giving it to those influencers. And they took what is one of the most disgusting operations with what they said to be 250 victims of child pedophilia. And these influencers thought in a completely tone deaf that they would turn up at the White House, receive these binders, and smile and take photo ops because they're getting access to the information ahead of everybody. And it went absolutely wild by the influencers that didn't receive the information coming after those that did. And we just got this disgusting show of the brain dead, the sheer tone deafness of people upset that they didn't get access to the files, which is revealing crimes against humanity and our children. And people think that this is an opportunity to start fighting with each other and taking photo ops. Look, but here's the thing. Don't get distracted by what's not important. They want you distracted by all those games. And there's a whole game of people saying who's got the information, who hasn't got the information. Don't get distracted by those games. Understand, follow the money, understand the constructs. Pam Bondi.
Hello, can you
here's Odd.
Yeah,
Do we have a blackout?
I think this is a point where I just got to interject because there's some highly trigger words that you're using, which could, we're already having issues with your channel in terms of the growth. Sure. So I think this is a time to really plug in and get as many people to head over to Rumble, where Simon's got a channel there. That's slowly sort of growing, and we just need more and more people there. And of course, simondixon.com. Many of you who'd like to see a lot of the uncensored videos there, it's time to head over to simondixon.com. Just thought
thanks,
so Simon, there are trigger words that you're saying here.
Yeah,
so I'm just a little bit cautious that your channel's going to get banned at this point.
Has YouTube actually taken us out of the broadcast now?
No, most likely. Well, there's quite a few words that you used. That's going to get it flagged.
All right, so we back up all videos on simondixon.com, so make sure you're a member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, and also follow me on Rumble, because if we get taken out, we will continue over on Rumble, and if you're watching on X, hopefully we'll be able to continue doing that, but over time, we know X may get more and more, as more and more artificial intelligence and this vision moves forward that we know we're transitioning to, we know we're going to get a change that's happening there. But anyway, we shall continue. So thank you very much, Azad, for pointing that out. And so, we had Pam Bondi, who was giving lots and lots of tweets as well. Kash Patel, he came out and he was basically saying very, very strong statements that all the information will be released. I choose to say that basically because the strategic interest is aligned, that we may, that they have the intention to release certain things, but, we shall see. But we know that we don't need to worry. We can just see what gets released versus what does get released and whether we get censored on this as well. But anyway, this exposes the whole, challenge, and we can actually decide and we can follow the money and determine whether we may actually get peace in the Middle East because the old model prevails, which means that it won't give the whole truth of the Mossad side, versus whether the model which is retreating towards AI, artificial intelligence, and the retreat of the proof of weapons network, which requires peace in the Middle East in order to make sure that that is actually won as well. So that is the main thing which I'll be looking out for. Will the US be forced into occupying Gaza in order to be drawn into war with Iran through a PSYOP operation? And who within America is America first versus who's driving towards that type of narrative? And we need to make sure that America is America first and gets to build the constructs of taking out the Federal Reserve and builds the constructs of exposing and remaining towards peace negotiations, as we have come very, very far to move towards that. Remember, in the end, while we are in the midst of an AI war between China and America, in the end, it is open source and decentralized that has to win, which is why Bitcoin and the proof of work network that took open source and decentralized to money, backed by proof of work that can't be taken down by any central bank and government, becomes massively important. And that model needs to be replicated for social and artificial intelligence. And I believe the cat's out the bag, and we need to make sure that we're transitioning to that. And so these are the different constructs and different directions that we can go through as we say that. Now, the reason that I believe that this is the macro model of the new type of, well, I called it New World Order that we talked about last week, and the meeting that's done in order to construct that, because you can see this is the model of the tariff war that is being followed and that Trump is following. So we had an announcement this week on the macro side that the 25% tariff on Canada and the 25% tariff on Mexico, and not only that, but an additional 10% on top of the 10% that was already announced, on top of the previous tariffs that had been placed on China. Trump is saying that they will go into effect as scheduled on March the 4th. Now, this could be a strong arm negotiation. And if it is just a strong arm negotiation, then we're following the old model of the proof of weapons network. If these tariffs actually go into place, then we know we are following the new model. And we will find out as of the 4th of March whether this is just a strong arm negotiation tactic or whether these tariffs actually go ahead. Because that is the model of rebuilding, of moving back to a regional powerhouse and dismantling the proof of weapons network. We had also different types of signal that is happening as well. Putin on the macro side came out and said that he is ready to supply 2 million tons of aluminium, as we would say in the UK, or aluminum, as you would say in US English, to the US market, which would stabilize prices as we move to such a construct. And we also had Putin come out and say that he would like to call to partner with Elon Musk in order to advance different technology development as they normalize between America and Russia as well. And we started to see some of the pushback on the BRICS side. So we saw announcements when Putin was strong-arming, saying 100% tariff on BRICS. If those 100% tariffs are just posturing and don't lead to any de-dollarization, then that's another further evidence that we are moving to this model of weakening the dollar in order to transition to the new model based upon the fact that Russia won the war and the new world order is being set. So the Brazilian president, Lula, he came out, Lula da Silva, and basically he's in charge of BRICS right now. Every year you get another person in charge of BRICS. Last year was Putin, and now it is Brazil. And he reiterated his commitment to ending US dollar dominance, which is in line with these different types of geopolitical world orders that are being negotiated right now. So Lula came out and said, no matter the challenges, BRICS is determined to establish alternative payment platforms amongst its member nations. So it may not be an alternative currency, but it can be a way of doing trade without having the dollar in the middle. He basically just completely dismissed the tariff threats of 100% tariffs of anyone that joins such a payment network. And at the same time, Trump continued to announce that there'll be 25% tariffs on European Union as well. This implies we're either getting a strong arming of the negotiation, but if they actually get through as per the deadline, then I believe we are witnessing the dismantling of the petrodollar and the eurodollar, and we could enter into an environment of peace. So what is happening in the markets in reaction? Well, we're getting severe corrections in markets, severe uncertainty, discussions around what is happening and where is the gold. We had car manufacturers in the European markets. We had Volkswagen and Mercedes. Their share prices are being, impacted by these tariff announcements. We're getting lots and lots of uncertainty, and we're getting lots and lots of corrections. These are all signals that we are moving towards the dismantling of the proof of weapons network, and we could enter into what I guess books like The Fourth Turning have said. And all of this is signaling towards that. So once we know whether these tariffs actually happen or don't happen, we know, when we're following the money, how to prepare ourselves financially. End of the day, we can opt out anyway because Bitcoin exists, which is why you need to make sure you're not trading the markets and doing everything I covered in the first part of this week in Bitcoin, so that you end up with more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and you don't fall for the fear, uncertainty, and doubt designed to get you to sell your Bitcoin to somebody else that is preparing through this. Now, Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, he visited the White House, and there was a very positive and shift in narrative. So Starmer's been warmongering, saying Putin is Hitler and all this type of stuff. And that we need to stop Putin from expanding and taking over the whole of Europe. Suddenly, based upon the switch of Trump narrative, when he goes to the White House, there's a tiny little bit of that left. But suddenly we're talking about peace negotiations and how we can maintain peace and how we can make sure that NATO is never, and that Ukraine is never, a member of NATO. So all of the stuff that we were covering that is exposed in WikiLeaks, that this was a CIA operation and they wanted to expand NATO in order to protect the petrodollar and the euro dollar, and that required expanding and pushing out to make sure that the peace agreements that ended the Cold War don't hold, and everything that was done by the neocon vision is being reversed as well. So UK comes out and says, don't worry, the UK doesn't need to tariff. The US doesn't need to tariff the UK because we have a trade surplus with the US. And immediately a letter was given from King Charles, the UK monarchy that is a part of the entire Zionist Rothschild network that came from the Bank of England that was set up, and suddenly says, Trump, for the very first time, you get to come and visit us, and we'd like to bring you to Buckingham Palace and Windsor, and you're invited, and we have a trade surplus, so you don't need to do any kind of tariffs on us, and we can work on constructing the New World Order, and I'll try and tone down what the EU are still trying to fool people into thinking, that they're supporting democracy, and they're trying to stop this expansion across Europe. And so UK has positioned itself to become a negotiator between America and the European Union based upon Brexit. So you can see how all of these different trends come together. There are no accidents. And suddenly we get the narrative of make Europe great again. That was a narrative designed to interfere into the German election, to make sure that the construct of the European Union can move towards an understanding of this new model and what is happening. And suddenly we're getting a power play as the European Union, Britain, and America get to kind of decide which side of this network they're on. Now, remember what I covered last year? That if Europe doesn't figure this out, they're just going to be a pawn, and they're going to be in the worst recession and the worst part of this, unless they actually get themselves in the middle of what was actually the reason for this whole CIA proxy war and NATO expansion. It was to make sure that all the money goes back into American contractors, and Europe was sacrificed in the European economy when the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline and sacrificed Germany to deconstruct its manufacturing base. And the economies enter deep and deeper into recession, as we're seeing 2 years on. And then we enter into the Germany election, which happened this week. And the real part of this all is that this was all about, in the end, making sure that America could get hold of the rare earth minerals that it needs to fight against the AI race with China, so that it could have the constructs of semiconductor chips, rebuild its manufacturing base, build out its data centers, and Europe was to be sacrificed so that it could dismantle the euro dollar and make sure that all those capital inflows from Europe, because Europe was getting weaker and weaker and was being lent to the US government to prop up the network to get the money back in to America, to get back into the military industrial complex in America, is started to be deconstructed based upon how much money of those rare earth, how much of those negotiations ends up in the hands of UK and Europe, based upon what essentially Trump was trying to get in. And that's why right now you are seeing Zelensky at the White House as we speak. And yesterday was Stana at the White House. And we're going to see what the end negotiation looks like, which is that Russia ended up occupying a bunch of that territory that contains the rare earths. And Europe, if they want to be sacrificed, they should be, they will continue giving the narrative that this is not time for normalization with Russia, and they will get crucified. But if they retreat right now, then Europe can actually position itself by aligning with BRICS, aligning at the meeting that's going to happen in Saudi Arabia in order to negotiate exactly who's going to be exporting gas to who, what resources, what oil is going to be, what the lines look like, the new world order that I discussed in last week's Bitcoin Hard Talk. If EU normalizes with Russia, decides that the best path to peace is actually to have Russia join NATO or whatever construct, but it needs to retreat all of a sudden. And that's why we're getting this roar of narratives and Jeffrey Sachs coming to educate EU about what's actually happening in front of their eyes. So if the Europeans want a future in this new world order, they could become the exporter of rare earth minerals between BRICS and America, and they could make themselves significant. That requires recognizing that Greenland is actually part of Denmark agreement, and trying to get a negotiation where Europe, based upon the experience they build in digging and extracting rare earth minerals in Ukraine, is actually the strategic asset that all this war was for, and why the CIA launches operation in the first place, and Europe got played as the sacrificial lamb. If Europe wants a future, it needs to make sure it gets in those negotiations, and that is what I think we're witnessing right now. And if Germany wants to rebuild its manufacturing base and become significant, then it needs to get its 50% discounted natural gas that it can get by turning on Nord Stream Pipeline 2 that America blew up, so that Europe would have to pay 50% more on its gas exports from America. That's how this whole thing happened. So Germany can get that 50% discount. The UK can continue on. It is the third largest manufacturer. China's number one, and America's number one for artificial intelligence. I'd say China's number two. China's leading in robotics. America can retreat and focus on that. And Europe can get itself in the middle, or it can be sacrificial lambs to America. And UK can become a center for artificial intelligence. All of the European unions can use its cheap labor in order to build data centers across Europe. It can get its cheap energy and electricity to power it, and it can work with America and becomes a player in this. And that can rebuild the European capital markets, deconstruct the euro dollar by weakening the dollar, strengthening the euro, and stopping the outbound investment that is being pushed into US treasuries as we transition to this monetary reform and a recollaboration of the dollar and the euro. So how do we know whether that's going to happen? Well, we had the Germany elections, and we had a change of government over to a center right and a coalition government with what they're calling far right as well. And so the new, the new narrative of Germany, which is the most important negotiator, is, do we get a switch from the warmongering that we had previously by Germany, and do we get a switch into peace talks and actual negotiations to make sure that there is a normalization with Russia, and we can determine whether Europe is going to be sacrificed or whether there is going to be done. Now, what we're seeing at the moment from the European Union is they're competing for the sanctioned $350 million and using the old model of the euro dollar and using NATO in order to ensure that some of that money comes into the German military industrial complex, the UK military industrial complex, and the French military industrial complex, rather than switching and recognizing that they need to turn the Nord Stream 2 pipeline back on, and they need to work and negotiate with Russia rather than painting it as something else. In the middle of that whole thing, we saw a covert operation that most likely happened from Russia, where we had the blowing up of a Kazakhstanian oil exports. And so I think after the American blow up of Nord Stream pipeline, we saw a retaliation from here in order to make sure that there is more strength in the negotiation and push it to switching on Nord Stream pipeline 2 based upon these different operations as well. So I don't know the exact following the money there, but I believe that this is probably a covert Russian operation when you follow the money. And this is because basically Russia's trying to get this towards normalization rather than the covert escalations, expansion of the Ukraine war, which will lead to more death and destruction. And Trump has revealed the game now as he deconstructs these games as well. So I think this is a play to get more Russian territory and weaken the negotiations. But that is what I'm seeing right now. So why does it become important? I think the last section that we're going to be covering in the macro section is that we now have new leadership within Germany. And I think it's a good thing if we start to get a reversal of the narrative, and we'll see whether the Germany leadership can navigate this environment and build a European Union that actually does not get wiped out and taken out by the military industrial complex of the old model of the euro dollar as well. So we are going to get announcement, and they may be happening right now, that comes out of, you can see that Trump is trying to push the negotiation forward as far as possible because he doesn't want Europe in the middle and wants to make sure that all of the deal goes towards America and Europe doesn't get their cut in between. In the gross, when you look at all the death and destruction that needed to happen as a result of this, you can see that Trump is pushing the fact that he thinks America gave $350 billion. Whatever you believe the number or not, we know that there was lots of corruption in between. We know that a lot of money was about selling US weapons and corruptly going into the cabal at the military industrial complex. But that also coincides with the $350 billion that was led to de-dollarization at the confiscation in European banks and American banks. Trump wants to make sure that there's no troops there, that they can get. And notice how the people that are getting in the way of peace right now, i.e. the European Union leadership, are the ones that have no troops on the line, are trying to take all that money and trying to make sure that it gets into there. And Trump has recognized that it is the rare earths that matter. And so strategically, do we get the pivot? In terms of the AfD was what we called the far right party. They got because Germany being in recession for 2 years now, the destruction of all of their industries that led to their manufacturing base, the switching off of their nuclear energy, the taking out of their cheap energy from Ukraine, from Russia, that led to record dissatisfaction and more votes for AfD, which was also boosted by Elon Musk through X. And now we have a coalition government. Remember that Elon Musk has those Tesla, a Tesla manufacturing base within Germany. And so that was used, and hopefully all of the stars and the moons all line up so that we can actually move towards peace and stop killing people in this disgusting war that was just a war for resources anyway. In the middle of that, the final section is the gold story. So gold almost hit $3,000. It corrected a little bit back down, but based upon these tariffs, there were the question of, is gold subject to tariffs in these international flows? Well, maybe not. But as a result of these tariffs, we saw banks going absolutely batshit crazy to get gold from the Bank of England and put it back into America. And we heard reports that they were literally taking on charter flights, flying gold bars from London over to New York City as a result of these Trump tariffs. And we're told that, there's a 6-week waiting list at the Bank of England to try and get some of that gold out. Is the gold there? Well, we'll find out. And I think that can be revealed in line with whatever the plan is as we recollaborate and dismantle the euro dollar. And that's why I think the Bank of England, the creator of the proof of weapons network, ended up, rather than going into the EU, kept its currency and then decided that it needed to Brexit at the right time in order to be the intermediary between this negotiations as we recalibrate. Apparently gold was lagging behind about $20. That was creating an arbitrage opportunity, and JP Morgan, HSBC, they were trying to move those gold reserves in order to optimize the process based upon this arbitrage and the tariff wars. But guess what? Bitcoin fixes that as well. And so eventually, as everything ends up with these block regions in the New World Order, many of the different regions can benefit from Bitcoin, whether it be the Middle East repurposing Bitcoin to get efficient use of energy, whether it be the European Union dismantling the European Central Bank and EU and building Bitcoin strategic reserves as their own countries to hedge against the central bank network, whether it be America looking at protecting itself from the Federal Reserve by having Bitcoin strategic reserves and transitioning to a stablecoin standard on artificial intelligence rather than a Fed proof of weapons network, or whether it be to back some of that gold with Bitcoin so that it can solve the problem of creating that multi-global South network. And how do you have this movement of gold that's very, very hard to audit and very, very hard to move? All of them can benefit from understanding that Bitcoin fixes that, and you can opt out and you can front run the whole system anyway. So apparently about $4 billion of gold is being transported. And one final story in the macro section. We had a story which just exposes the proof of weapons network for all that it is. That Citibank, a shareholder of the Federal Reserve System, accidentally credited a client account with $81 trillion, according to the Financial Times, of $81. And if you haven't figured out that banks are the creators of dollars based upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme that leads to this severe wealth inequality, and the Federal Reserve through the FDIC and these covert operations, backed up by the deep state of the CIA, Mossad, and MI6, are actually ways of extracting you from your resources through debt slavery. If ever there was an understanding, that is it. That they accidentally printed $81 trillion when it was meant to be $81 to a client. And that is in full exposure how the proof of weapons network that is currently fighting over rare earth minerals so that it can transition to an AI central bank digital currency and AI stablecoin world, that it needs those semiconductor chips for their electric vehicles, for their robotics, and for this proxy war over those resources. I hope it helps us understand exactly what is happening in the macro environment right now and how we position ourselves accordingly. And so that's everything for this week in the macro side. And we're going to move over to this week in geopolitics. Now, do me a favor. I am trying to make sure that the channel, which is probably getting censored because I cover these topics, continues to exist now that these secrets are being revealed as non-conspiracy theories and actually being revealed as conspiracy facts. So I need to get to over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube so I can get a blue check mark and get a review that I'm not engaging in anything to be censored now that we are transitioning to this world. So hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. YouTube will start sending you notifications and I can get that review over 100,000 subscribers. And if you are already a subscriber, please do share, like, retweet, add a comment below. Let me know what you think. And I'm gonna get a quick water break for a second, and we're gonna move over to part 3 this week in geopolitics. Geopolitics, there is another conflict of the proof of weapons network that your news is not telling you about. Nothing is being reported, despite a massive amount of death and destruction that is being required for this. And so normally we focus on the Ukraine-Russia side, and normally we focus on the Israel-Palestine side so that we can get ahead and understand what's happening. But this week in geopolitics, I want to draw some attention to something that is not getting the attention and is in fact a vital part of the proof of weapons network that we need to make sure we understand. And that is that Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is currently a major target for the proof of weapons network right now as we speak. And there is very little attention being drawn to it. And I want to make sure that in the geopolitical side, we understand the relevance and how it actually relates to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as well as the Israel and Palestine conflict right now. So while we have been completely focused on those two conflicts, and we have also been focused on US and Panama and Greenland and European Union and China and Taiwan and US and everything that's happening there are actually many more conflicts that are happening in the African regions and the African nations that we have to understand, because they are being covered up and painted as something different to what is actually happening as we speak. But of course, we follow the money. And when you follow the money, you get a different narrative to when you listen to the politicians and you follow the news. And so let's dig into what we need to know and what we need to understand so that we can watch what is happening in Africa right now and the Democratic Republic of Congo and understand how they all relate together, because there is no isolation here. Right. So as we currently speak right now, Rwanda is conquering land from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's call it DRC. DRC has 10 times more population than Rwanda and 80 times more land than Rwanda, and yet it is currently having its government overthrown by Rwanda, by militias. And there was an invasion, or there was a one-day event, just like October the 7th, that had 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers that crossed over into the Democratic Republic of Congo on January the 25th. And it's led to, since then, 7,000 deaths. These deaths and this invasion is being supported by a group called M23. And M23 is an armed militia group. And we need to follow the money to understand what is that and who's it controlled by. When you get the answer, you will know that M23 is directed, armed, and funded by the Rwandan government, but claims to be completely independent of it. The Rwandan government, through its militia M23, has sieged control and captured basically the capital of a 1 million population that is leading to forced displacement as we speak. The United Nations has said that on 25th of January, which is a date that no one's talking about, like 7th of October, that 3,000 civilians lost their life and 700,000 were forcibly displaced. That is 3 times bigger than October the 7th, and yet very little interest from the Western world or the media is placed upon that. Why? Because now we know that the media is fully funded by NGOs and organizations that are part of the proof of weapons network that prints the money, that causes the inflation, that is used in order to get back to the military industrial complex so that their stock prices can be used in order to borrow against it, so that then those debts and can be used in order to make you think that there are these crazy regions around the world as people resist against the proof of weapons network, but is actually through covert operations and intelligence agencies funding these groups. And the media is being used in order to think that we are completely superior and we are the civil ones. And why can't they just get their act together? And why are we sending money over there? Well, they are being used to arm and overthrow the entire government of the Congo, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, who is behind Rwanda? Let's follow the money and understand. And how does this connect to everything else that we're saying? So, the Rwandan government is claiming no connection to M23. They're saying that they are only sending their army into the DRC because they are protecting the ethnic minority Rwandans in DRC. And billions of dollars of gold, or billions of dollars worth of gold, tin, and coltan, a mineral or a rare earth mineral, which is needed in order to have essential parts for laptops and phones and smartphones, have essentially been taken out through these M23 occupations, taken out of the territory that's being occupied by M23, and suddenly Rwanda, that has none of these minerals, is the largest exporter in the world, all coming out from Rwanda, which is, we're told, has all these rare earth minerals, but actually has none of them. And where are they being exported to? Well, they're going out to the US, of course, that needs rare earth minerals. It's going out to the European Union that needs rare earth minerals. And the last time that something like this happened, in 1998, it led to 3 million people being killed. In 1994, there was a Rwandan genocide that led to 800,000 minority, what they called the Tutsi. Sorry if I got that wrong. The Tutsi population completely being genocided in order to make sure that everything was lined up for these resources. To put that in context, that was 11% of the entire Rwandan population. 2 million of those ended up as refugees in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This led to the first Congo War, and later that led in 1998 to a second Congo War that was led by Rwanda and Uganda in order to take over certain occupations and territories. And this alliance led to what was called the African World War, and later the peace negotiations that were negotiated between 2002 and 2003, right after the whole dot-com boom and bust, when the industry was recollaborating to the industry that is reliant upon laptops and later smartphones. And that was exactly in 2000, if you remember, the reason I became such a geek 25 years ago, because my father lost all of his money in the dot-com boom and bust and asked me to figure out and follow the money and find out what actually happened to his money. Later, that led to me, obsessing over money and trying to get into monetary reform. And then monetary reform led me to when Satoshi Nakamoto launched Bitcoin, speaking in 2011 at the first Bitcoin conference. That led to a financial freedom that eventually led to being able to support my whole family and reward my father, who later passed away during the proof of weapons network takedown of FTX and Celsius. The reason why I ended up a creditor, because I borrowed against some of my Bitcoin. I believe everything happens for a reason. But anyway, a bit of a tangent. I find that interesting that it was around that time that we had what was essentially one of the worst wars since World War II. And yet, because this is happening in Africa, and the net beneficiaries are the proof of weapons network, we barely even hear about it. It's barely even covered. 3,000 people in one day, 3 times more than October the 7th. And look at the difference in narrative. Look at the difference in exposure to what's happening. This, I put it, is another part of the proof of weapons network. And we need to understand how these groups get funded in order to follow the money and understand how this whole operation is continued. This, in fact, that war was the deadliest war since World War II, as I said, with either 3 million to 5.5 million deaths over that. As a result of this destabilization, which is constructed from the proof of weapons network, in order to make sure that the minerals that are needed and the resources that are needed get to where they're meant to go based upon funding these rebel groups and militias through intelligence agencies, as we know and we've covered in previous episodes. We now have approximately, it led to about 100 different rebel groups and militia groups that emerged, including the M23 that is currently in the DRC, that is leading to this death and destruction and essentially pirating of resources that has made Rwanda the largest exporter as well. The way this actually works, and I think this is the beginning of the topic and the research that I've been putting together, is Rwanda started taking all of the money that it was exporting, the money that was being relieved, and investing in its army and really, really building up the Rwandan army to a large degree, and created basically a business model based upon trading with the West and the US, the UK, the European Union are the key investors in the model, where the money was used in order to build up the Rwandan army. And then the Rwandan army led to a growing economy, and then a growing economy that was based upon taking out the resources of different, pirating essentially the resources of different regions. This actually led to, the DRC, which has those resources. It was also how Israel, the proxy, was used in order to extract all of the blood diamonds. Do you remember the Blood Diamond movie? and much of the industry. This is how the model was actually followed. So within Rwanda and Democratic Republic of DRC, you have many Israeli tycoons, as you did in apartheid South Africa. And you have these different industries that are protecting these different resources. Rwanda has the second largest contribution of soldiers to basically the United Nations peacekeeping missions. And so Rwanda developed through training, very advanced training, through Western intelligence of that army, a model that essentially led to soldiers as a service. And so when we had these peacekeeping missions, the Rwandan army is the second largest contributor of soldiers. And so this model of renting out soldiers in order to occupy different regions that then lead to conflicts with other proxies. Remember, we talked about the whole how ISIS and the Islamist PSYOP is a Zionist PSYOP in order to take proxies of Israel, call them ISIS, and then you can go into that region in order to say you're combating terrorism, and then you're able to basically have justification for wars and bombing of regions by having one of your militias fight another one of those militias, and then you can install a dictator and you say you're exporting democracy in order to ensure that those resources can be used purely for that, and you can expand the model, and that's basically what has come of the Rwandan model from following all the money. This basically creates that soldiers as a service model, and the proxy wars. And remember, you're only told in Western media that there's only one country doing that. Who's that? You're told that it's just Iran that's doing that, and they're funding militias and proxies. And who are they funding? Well, they're funding the resistance against the occupation of the construct of the foreign entity, which is the Rothschild-created Israel government that was designed in order to prop up and create the petrodollar and all of these psyops in the first place, and push back against any resistance, i.e. the Palestinian cause, which is why Iran is funding these different proxies, and they have their own agendas as well. But an example of this was in 2021, when essentially the Central African Republic, it contracted the Rwandan army, and it also constructed the Russian Wagner group, which is another similar group on the Russian side. And it hired those, different groups in order to push back against the rebels that were invading the capital at the time. And then you had Mozambique used them as well in order to push back against an insurrection from what it says is fighting terrorism through ISIS. Now, we know that ISIS is weaponized through the US and Israeli intelligence and the deep state in order to create the fake war on terror 2.0, which will be further exposed through the different documents that hopefully get dropped with the 9/11 files and the various other things that we've said were Mossad operations in order to justify that in conjunction with CIA operations, and Saudi Arabia, where these different, an essential part of the petrodollar that was negotiated, and you have these groups that were pushed through. I did a whole thread on this. I don't want to go deeper into that. But anyway, you can take over a region and have the piracy of these resources by saying that we'll have one of our militia groups fighting another one of our militia groups, and Israel, UK, US proxies are all fighting each other in order to take over those various resources and flow the resources through the proof of weapons network, and say that you're exporting democracy when clearly there is a deep state where the central bank sits on top the intelligence agency sits underneath, and we have these fake democracies with left and right to distract you from what's actually really happening when you follow the money. Anyway, the Rwandan army, originally it was supported by France because they need to protect their French interests. There's various regions that are stuck on the French franc, proof of weapons network and colony when that was replaced by euro, but it led behind it these different colonies that are then pegged their currency to the European Central Bank and various other things, and you have these different regions there. But France had a $20 billion project, which is a company you may have heard of, Total. And remember the PSYOPs with Iran, which is replace the democratically elected with a CIA and MI5 operation in 1953 to protect when Iran wanted to nationalize its oil that led to the Iranian Revolution in 79. Because they wanted to use the oil, which was the oil for British Petroleum. And so the Rwandan side is there to protect Total, which is needs to be protected. And so that's where you have the birth of all of these different militia and deep state operations. Remember, across the whole region, you have these different French colonies, regions, that if you listen to the resistance against it in these regions that suffer from such corruption and destabilization and dictators and various other things, they say this is France doing neo-colonialism in the region. If you listen to Niger, if you listen to Chad, if you listen to Senegal, if you listen to these various things, it is saying that the French government is using this new neo-colonial model, and so is the UK, Israel, and US, by using Rwanda and this soldier as a service in order to occupy and fight these proxy wars that are various other things. And so France has sent so far $500 million into developing aid in Rwanda. And remember what we know from the USAID, that none of that money gets to the aid and what it's meant to be getting to, because it ends up with some of it funding these different militia groups into training camps and paying all the bribes and everything that needs to happen in order to make sure that the investment comes right back into the region and not to the people that are suffering from all of these installed dictators as well. The EU has sent tens of millions of euros into safeguarding Total in Mozambique. Rwanda has now become essentially a Western militia and an army in order to pirate the different rare earths, oil and gas resources that are needed in order to win this AI warfare across the entire African region. Basically, they basically are calling Rwanda, framing it in the region, the Singapore of Africa. It's the one that we need to support. And who does Rwanda sponsor when you flow the money? How does the money get back once it comes in? Well, they sponsor Arsenal. And Rwanda is also a chief sponsor of the Grand Prix. And Rwanda is also a sponsor of the NBA. And if it flows the money back in, then it can attract tourism, which brings people into the region. So it's the largest region for tourism that can then expand the GDP. And relative to all the other parts of the region, Rwanda has been growing at 8% per year off the back of the genocide that led to everything that is being happening right now in taking over the the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC government. And $1.3 billion in Western aid was received into Rwanda in order to prop up the proof of weapons network as well. This is the highest amount of aid in the entire region. And what does it actually mean? It means that, of course, Rwanda is Western protecting democracies. And therefore, because the money comes back, if you keep a dictator in that is engaging in supporting M23 in order to pirate resources, we can call it a democracy rather than a dictator, and we don't need to sanction it because it's backed by the very militias that are designed in order to get those resources out as well. Essentially, when you see M23 on the news, if they report anything about it, it is a Western militia in order to pirate resources so that Rwanda can then flow the money into the proof of weapons network, and you'll get a very, very different version of the story. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, their rare earths and their metals are essentially being stolen, and they're being exported to the West, and Rwanda is the largest exporter, even though it has none of those resources. Just as India took the sanctioned Russian gas and oil and then exported it back to Europe, and then added the price increase so that America could end up exporting its gas, you end up with these stupid games in the proof of weapons network that is hidden behind obfuscation, control of media, and meant to trick you into thinking what is happening in those regions are very different. This is why the African regions, if they get a chance to fight against the proof of weapons network, can hopefully rebuild their financial system. And who was the person that tried to do that? Gaddafi from Libya, that wanted to build a gold-backed Pan-African currency to fight back against the proof of weapons network. And what were you told who Gaddafi is and what he's doing? Through the media that props up the proof of weapons network, so you could topple that regime and ensure that a gold-backed, debt-free, Islamic finance-based financial system to push to unify the different Pan-African regions as a resistance movement against the proof of weapons network was never allowed to happen. Just as it happened when it was built in Lebanon and Iraq and in Syria, you can see the pattern. And so this ties into the construct of the propping up of the euro dollar, the propping up of the petrodollar, in order to prop up the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme that ties in all of our history. And we can see it happening right in front of our eyes as well. Now, why are we not told about that one while we're exposing the other parts of it? Because those rare earth minerals are needed in order to get the proof of weapons network retreated into a stablecoin AI standard. And those resources are needed while we figure out what's going to happen to Ukraine, Greenland, and the Middle East as it retreats back. And why actually many of the regions where China was investing as part of their Belt and Road Initiative suddenly ended up with overthrows of governments, death and destruction, insurrections, and Western-backed militias coming in as well. So Rwanda has no resources of its own, and yet suddenly it's the largest exporter of coltan, which is essential for producing smartphones and laptops for us. So DRC has the largest amount of it. It's the largest amount of coltan in the region. And it has the largest amount of reserves in the world. And Rwanda, a US and EU proxy, ends up in a different region fighting ISIS, which is an Israeli and US proxy, is in a war in order to justify occupation and occupy the land and take over the land and take those minerals so that they can be exported via the democracies that are being waged and warred, paid for by the US taxpayer, middle-class America getting wiped out through inflation. And when there's 9% inflation in America, there's 900% inflation in Zimbabwe, so that they can shut down any resistance against that by controlling the proof of weapons network and the Bank for International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the construct that they've developed in order to make sure that any resistance against it is stamped out. And of course, Rwanda is suddenly the largest exporter of coltan from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we're told about these crazy M23 militias. And the largest recipient of the Rwandan coltan, just so you know, is Intel. And Intel is being split up as we speak. We're meant to be told this is capitalism in order to make sure that it is being split across the different companies. They're going to be building the semiconductor chips within America as well. Okay, so I just wanted to tie together that in the geopolitical section. And just so you know, the European Union has signed a memorandum of understanding in 2023 to make sure that it increases imports of the DRC stolen coltan via Rwanda as well. M23 has now generated approximately $800 million in revenue for the Rwandan government. And DRC is essentially now losing $1 billion in 2023 as a result of this M23 occupations of the militias as well. There's no sanctions that go to Rwanda as a result of this. And instead, Rwanda is contributing its troops to other regions that we'll have to cover in future episodes and future geopolitical sections of the proof of weapons network, like Sudan, like Central African Republic. And so those models are being used. And what are we doing in those regions? We're told that they're fighting against the Islamist regime, which was a Western intelligence agency word designed to justify the fake war on terror 2.0 that they were creating in order to trick you and prop up the petrodollar. Anyway, so what you're seeing right now is Congolese protesters. They're being attacked by essentially militias of US, France, Belgium, Japan, Rwanda, Uganda, that is propping up the M23 invasion, and all of the proxy wars that we're seeing right now. And of course, they're saying that they're doing this in order to protect the region, because it could spark off essentially a regional war. And how does that connect to what's happening with the other region? Well, obviously, Israel is a construct in order to deconstruct that. Who is surrounded by all of this? Well, Egypt. Egypt is surrounded by Sudan. Egypt is surrounded by Libya. Sudan was toppled for this very reason, for the resources. Libya was where Gaddafi was going to create the gold-backed currency for the unification of the Pan region. And so you get these different groups that are designed in order to wipe them out. And who else is Egypt surrounded by? Lebanon, surrounded by Palestine, and has a border which is being negotiated right now in order to stop entering into phase 2 of the peace negotiations and the ceasefire of the Palestinian region right now. And so these are all connecting because essentially Egypt is being asked to take the refugees from Gaza, from West Bank, from Libya, and from Sudan, as you have this expansionist vision in order to make sure that the resources get back to where the Greater Israel Project is designed to get it to. Proxy war after proxy war. I hope by following the money you understand that. Now we're being told that on the media, M23, they want to overthrow the entire Democratic Republic of Congo government. And next, they want to take over the capital. Uganda has aspirations of taking over Kenya. And we're seeing the student riots that led to shootings and various other things. The network goes on and on and on. Artificial constructs in order to destabilize regions so that the resources can be used in order to prop up the proof of weapons network that we've covered as well. If this leads to a second, essentially African war, then we need to make sure that we're watching this. And that's why you have different proxies, it could be pushed to with Wagner and Russia and China, various Belt and Road initiatives and various other things. So we need to make sure that we follow the money and understand exactly the games that are being played in this region. I believe that we are seeing a strategic retreat from the Middle East as we transition, but we also need to see the strategic retreat of US and all those bases from Africa as well. And that's kind of why I won't go too deep into it right now, but that's why a territorial or information war was waged against the US proof of weapons network and South Africa as well. I'll keep following those and we'll cover those in other regions. The very final part of the geopolitical section, I just want to make sure that we give all the updates that happened this week in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and as well in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now how you can see how the Congolese M23 invasion for resources is also tied into many of these proxy wars and proof of weapons network intelligence agency operations. Right. So if you remembered what I covered last week, let's start with the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I said that we entered into a ceasefire and the strategic interest of America is to retreat and have a two-state solution. But Israel wants to draw America into war by occupying the territory so that it can then push it into a war with Iran so that Israel can find itself in the middle and center between the artificial intelligence war between America and China, and it can position itself right in the middle and having the technology and all the cyber security so that it can control those different units. And it wants to hold on to the Greater Israel Project, which was a construct of the British Empire and then handed over to America. But America no longer needs it because it was going to lose the war to China, as I covered in the macro section earlier today as well. Right. So let's get right down to the micro. What did we see last weekend? So last Saturday, after Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 71, last Friday, Hamas released the 6 hostages as per the ceasefire agreement, which was double the number. It said that it would release 6 instead of 3 as a gesture to get to phase 2, where Israel then has to leave the border between Egypt and the West Bank, and Gaza, and that they need to leave that region, which was the negotiation in phase 2. And so Israel immediately decided that it wanted to stop the release of the 620 Palestinian hostages that were meant to be released in exchange for the 6 Palestinian hostages. So once again, Israel breached the ceasefire agreement, and we enter into these behind-the-scenes negotiations while Trump puts the narrative out there in order to make sure that he's satisfying the Zionist control, members, making sure that the Israel and America relationship looks strong at the front. But my speculation is that they're fighting in the background because of this new world order. Israel wants to get America into war to keep the old model of the proof of weapons network, and Trump wants to retreat towards focusing on America first as well. And so Netanyahu came out and he blocked the release. He cited that the objection to releasing the 620 Palestinians were because of the ceremonies where Hamas, essentially every time it releases the Israeli soldiers, It has these kind of propaganda ceremonies where it shows the Israeli soldiers, hostages coming out. Some of them were soldiers, other them as civilians, and they come out and then they look in good shape, and so they release the videos showing that the exchange happens, and then you see all the Palestinian hostages coming out, and they are subject to all the torture and everything that they've been subjected to. Netanyahu decided that it's because of that they won't release the 620 Palestinian hostages, and also the dead bodies. We covered this last week, of the 4 that Hamas claimed were killed due to Israeli bombing, and Israel were killed by Hamas. Those 4 bodies were returned, and they needed to do an investigation into it, and they claimed that the mother was not the right body, and so they needed to delay that, and so they needed to call off the ceasefire. And so last weekend it didn't go through as needed or as agreed, and so we're nearing the very end of phase 1, and Israel, or the Israeli government, are trying to stop it getting to phase 2, where the soldiers have to retreat, and Israel stops occupying the border between Egypt and Gaza. But the Israeli government has said, if you allow that to happen, then the coalition government said you have to go back to war. We want to continue this. And Netanyahu could risk toppling the Israeli government if he doesn't go back to war and he continues with peace. And so there is a big issue with that. But right up until the final moment on Thursday, and I believe it's because the American negotiators, the Egyptian negotiators, and the GCC are forcing the Israeli government in Netanyahu's hand, on Thursday, you got the release of the 620 Palestinian hostages. They were returned, and they were still subject to all the torture, abuse, and just looking like absolute victims of crimes against humanity. They all come out on Thursday. And this coincides, when I'm following the money, between the negotiations that are happening between the US, Hamas, the GCC, and they're pushing to get to phase 2, which is a 2-state solution and a lasting peace agreement that they're tying into the Saudi Arabia meeting, and the peace agreement between the Russia and Ukrainian conflict as well. And so, as I said, this is a problem for what the Israeli government are saying that what they want. And this is in direct conflict with what the Israeli protesters are pushing for as well. And so all of this is coming into what is hopefully the dismantling of the corrupt Israeli government, and hopefully the moving towards a 2-state solution that we could potentially have, and peace in the region, just based upon the AI war between China and America that I covered last week as well. Well, anyway, Israel is pushing to try and get US more and more involved in Iran. The strategic goal, sorry, not right now, but the goal is to get America to occupy Gaza. Then they can expand and have America deliver the Greater Israel Project, which is the opposite of the Trump administration's goal or stated goal. So that can push to Iran, and then all the escalation towards World War III, so that Israel can sit between and stop, that Israel is no longer useful to the New World Order and America model. And so then you have to just have a 2-state solution and getting on with your neighbors. And so the coalition government has stated that if phase 2 happens, then they will leave, and that breaks up the Israeli Netanyahu coalition government. And therefore, when you have a deconstruction of the government, you may end up with peace. And that's the problem that those people are looking at, whatever the Israeli politics is coming from there. The US, as I said, is deconstructing the deep state, as we covered in the macro section, retreating towards that AI side and competing with China. And they cannot afford to be in any forever war. It will lead to the loss of the regional power that they want to be after the deconstruction of the proof of weapons network. And they're trying to protect Israel's reputation at the same time as knowing that Israel's causing a problem and getting in the way of peace right now, which is getting in the way of their documents, their strategic goals, which is why we're having these releaser files. Is it going to be the one that blames Mossad and reveals, the Mossad operations, or is it going to be the one that just blames it on the CIA with all the files? That is the leverage to try and push Israel into making sure that there is a two-state solution, self-determination for the Palestinians and self-determination for the Israeli state, but without being funded with a proof of weapons network to topple and destabilize the regions. So Hamas have come out, and obviously you don't get any of this in traditional media, but they've confirmed that they are now willing to step aside. They don't want to be the government if there is new leadership determined, which America would pick the Palestinian Authority, which is a puppet US government, obviously. But Hamas has said they would step aside because Palestinian Authority is in charge of West Bank, and Israel is trying to make sure that the Palestinian Authority doesn't exist anymore, because that is where US want to install as their puppet government in a two-state solution. And the Israeli government will not allow for a two-state solution. They want the full sticks. They want to get rid of all the Palestinians. And phase one ends as per the ceasefire agreement on the 1st of March. In phase two, what's meant to happen? Well, before it gets to phase two, phase one is that they're meant to take the 60,000 mobile homes and support Palestinians that in the humanitarian aid. They're holding those aid. It's not getting in. The mobile aid isn't getting in. And there was meant to be the 200,000 tents that were meant to help Palestinians survive the bad weather as they enter into Eid, which starts now. And so Israel doesn't want those to get through, because that may mean that the two-state solution is going to happen. So all of the stalling tactics are happening from Netanyahu. All of those are happening. And it has basically made a statement that the IDF will not do what it was agreed in phase two. The IDF will not retreat from the Egypt-Gaza border, which is what needs to happen in phase two. And so we're stalling. We're meant to get there before the 1st of March. And that is what I think determines whether we get the full truth of the Epstein Files or the 70% truth of the Epstein Files. That's why I think all this coincides as well. And obviously, there are very many different agendas of the neocon vision and the neocon Zionist vision, and all the internal politics within America and all the different factions within the deep state at the moment. An Israeli official came out and said that they will not leave. The Palestinian Authority has now been banned from the West Bank, which is the media outlet that was reporting what's happening in the West Bank. And that's exactly what happened as they escalated the genocide in Gaza. And now the West Bank has displaced, which has nothing to do with the conflict, 40,000 Palestinians from the West Bank. And Israel has now sent in tanks, which have now deployed across the West Bank as well. And so they're now targeting areas that are governed by the Palestinian Authority, which is the US puppet government, to make sure that the US doesn't get its puppet government for the two-state solution. And that's got nothing to do with Hamas, and yet they're doing that within the West Bank. And this is essentially the conflict that I think we're seeing, because Israel prefer Hamas to be in charge, because that's the justification for bringing the US into the proxy war, so that they can get the escalation that they want to justify their vision of that as well. The defense minister of Israel, what's his name, Katz, he actually announced that the Israeli troops will remain in certain areas in the West Bank for up to a year, which is the complete opposite of the ceasefire agreement, And that's completely preventing the return of tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians from the West Bank right now. Now, with the protesters that are protesting within Israel, i.e. the families of, I believe there's 62 more hostages, Israeli hostages to be released, the Israeli families have stated that Netanyahu wants to return to the war against Israelis' interest and without the hostages, and use the hostages in order to justify keeping on to his political career so that Netanyahu doesn't get displaced as well. And so the Israeli hostages are protesting against that. The protesters within Israel are urging the government to accept Hamas's offer to return all of the hostages earlier, move to a two-state solution, and Hamas step aside for probably the Palestinian Authority, which is the US puppet government. And then Trump can say, we got this region, they can retreat, and they don't need to prop up all the proxy wars. And Israel can essentially be enforced to a two-state solution by the GCC, Saudi Arabia, and the power regions as well. To fight back against that, Israel also put out fighter jets over Lebanon last week as well, and just escalated military action, which all coincides with the meetings between Egypt and Jordan and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation countries, who are preparing to reveal the Phase 2 plan, which likely involves the two-state solution and the retreat of the illegal occupation enforced by a security deal between America and Saudi Arabia, as I outlined last week in the New World Order meeting as well. And so that is what I think is actually happening right now. Trump basically came out and at the same time, he's trying to do reversal of the euro-dollar one as well. And so that's everything that happened this week. And so now we're back to, on the 1st of March, and we'll cover what happens next week, whether we get into Phase 2, which I believe could only be pushed by America defunding Israel, or we end up with some kind of false flag escalation operation and a delay of Phase 2, which is a real net disadvantage for America, and a massive strategic advantage for Israel, as I believe those are on opposite sides right now. Right, at the same time, let's have a look at the Russian and Ukrainian conflict, and then we can wrap everything up and get ready for what happens next week. So Trump has basically come out and said, let's go through the tit for tat that happened. He reversed the narrative, the US aid-funded narrative that Putin is Hitler, and is trying to take over the whole of Europe, that the EU is still doing, and said that he's in very good talks with Putin, and he's not in such good talks with Ukraine. And so there was that massive tit for tat between Zelensky and Trump. And suddenly, when Zelensky's visiting the White House, which is happening as we speak, I'll cover what happens next week. Basically, he was saying in the press release, you called Zelensky a dictator, and Trump said, for diplomatic reasons, did I say that? No, I think Zelensky's a good guy, and we're going to be meeting, and we're going to sign a rare earth deal, and we're going to get the deal done, and just pushed everything back towards getting the deal done before the EU warmongers, neocons, can try and get the deal in their favor. And that's why we're seeing this negotiation try to rush forward. And then managing all of these different things. So Zelensky basically came out and said, that $350 billion of frozen Russian funds, those assets belong to Ukraine. And so he's trying to get leverage there. Zelensky also said that he'd be willing to quit his role in exchange for NATO membership. Trump came out and said that sanctions discussions can carry on with Putin to end the war in Ukraine, and a major economic deal can likely take place between the US and Russia. And so you can see the deal that's trying to be put together around that. Ukraine trying to get leverage here. It's already been determined that it can't be in a NATO membership because we know the PSYOP and the CIA operation, the bit that Trump's not telling you that we've covered in previous broadcasts as well. And everything we covered in the macro section, the deal that is looking to be put through, which is all about the rare earth minerals. And Trump is looking essentially for what seems to be, and we'll get an announcement, maybe the announcement has happened while we're live, like a $500 billion rare earth mineral deal on the lines of some kind of 50-50 where they'll do the digging. Ukraine gets to, apparently has about $3 trillion of assets. And then EU's involved in that and US is involved in that. And then because they're there, they get some type of security. But the reality is that Putin never wanted to actually expand across. It was actually in reaction to the reason that this happened, the PSYOP of the NATO expansion and the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline that Trump can't tell you about as well. So now the issue is that the rare earths are mostly in the Russian occupied territory. And this is why EU is not, pushing normalization, but pushing, let's take the 350 billion and let's use that to invest in the military industrial complex and the old model, basically the model that is owned. And what is really interesting is we had for the first time a United Nations meeting where the proxies, the people that are able to veto vote any UN resolution, which is UK, France, China, Russia, and US. But now US and Russia are voting against the United Nations resolution that was trying to expand against Russia. And they're voting together for peace resolution against UK, France, and the other veto votes as well, which is really, really interesting to see. And really good sign as well that we're actually, again, pushing back on the petrodollar narrative and the eurodollar narrative and focusing on America first. Putin says that Russia is now ready to work together with the US on a rare earth minerals and steel deal as well. The Secretary of State of America, Marco Rubio, he came out and said that the US will not allow Ukraine to acquire nuclear weapons. So putting over the red lines. Besant from the American team as well warns that wants a rare earth minerals, but won't send troops to Ukraine. And so there won't be American troops in Ukraine, which is a problem to get in the way of the deal. And Russia came out and rejected returning any of the annexed Ukrainian territory and any of the lands as part of a deal. Remember in the old videos, the 2023 deal, Zelensky basically said, in terms of how the US deal, you give us credit and we will pay you back after the war. So, we know that, Trump's pushing that narrative. The money was going back. Biden corrupted. It went into the corrupt deals. But that was the military industrial complex, which is propped up by the proxy wars, which are the Mossad operations that make sure that the wars are actually escalated in the first place based upon the proof of weapons network. Basically, the hypocrisy of it all is shown. But we're okay with that as long as we get to peace model. And again, if you want these contracts to actually come out and say how they were actually done, surely there was a signed contract. They didn't just send the money over. Why not just open source the contracts? And so we can stop speculating on that, just like the JFK files and the Epstein files. You can just open source these contracts as well, but obviously as part of a negotiation as well. But the UK is, I believe, getting ready to... it said that it's now escalating a higher sanctions package. That's trying to get leverage for the deal that they actually want to do. And also said it's going to be expanding its military spending to a higher percentage of its GDP. and that will be a good relationship with America and is going to take more responsibility for its own, which is code word for more of the money coming into the UK military-industrial complex, the Germany military-industrial complex, and the French military-industrial complex, rather than the American military-industrial complex. And so, Prime Minister Starmer had the meeting with Trump, and it was a meeting that was, very much in line with the Trump narrative. And Starmer not really calling Putin a warmonger that wants to expand across Russia, but a little bit of the narrative in order to save face. And then that positions him in order to negotiate, as I said in the macro section, between the European Union and America, trying to get to whatever the agreement and whatever's going to be announced that ends this war once and for all. What the $350 billion of Russian assets are going to look like, and how you have troops, where those troops are, and UK negotiating between them. There was a little bit of a leak in AEN News. This is the final part, and then we're going to end it, which is traditionally, how it leaks is Ukraine intelligence. And it basically said that the deal that Zelensky wanted to do with Trump can't be done because Britain's already done that deal. And so all of those negotiations are going to be happening. And that's a reason for all of this, and all of them want to do the rare earth deal and remain whether Europe is relevant in the future of what this is all for. And so this time next week, we'll cover exactly what happens from Zelensky's visit. I did catch a little bit of it just before, and Trump was kind of trolling on Zelensky because he wasn't dressed in a suit, saying that he's wearing his best outfit today, which I thought was funny. But we will continue to follow the money, and that's everything I need to cover on the geopolitical section of This Week in Geopolitics. I hope you understand now how the Congo side relates to the Israel-Palestine conflict, and also the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And hopefully the new world order will be constructed in Saudi Arabia, and we can just deconstruct the petrodollar and the euro dollar once and for all. And we can move to the next evil, which is the AI stablecoin race and all the things that we've covered as we did this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Many are going to get wrecked, others are going to do well, and I want to make sure you're on the right side of this change. And so do me a favor, please do subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all, help me get to 100,000 subscribers so I can remove the shadow ban, get the blue check, and make sure that this gets out to more people. Please put a comment below, and hopefully the language that I'm using doesn't get us banned. If not, follow me on Rumble. And I'll publish them on X, and also join the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal in case everything gets censored. We've got our backup there where we back up everything in case it gets taken down by the Proof of Weapons network. But hopefully that doesn't need to happen. We can do it with peace, love, and unity. And I will see you for episode 73 of Bitcoin Hard Talk next week. Peace.